your phone line today?
Yeah, yes.
Oh, I saw that meeting with the representatives got canceled due to COVID. Now we'll do it. He's already had it. He had it like a couple months ago. Yeah.
We were at a meeting the night before he went.
Oh, bummer.
One more day of testing and then he's
Okay. Oh, what a bummer.
But haven't you heard?
right.
All right, folks, it's 6:30. Let's do it.
Let's do it.
Start that meeting.
All right, once Will is in place, we'll see who we've got. If we've got.
Supposed to be here. That's where the name is.
All right, well, Will is
Everyone's watching the work here.
finding.
There's a different view here that I'm not familiar with. Okay, we ready?
We are ready.
Let's start.
Recording in progress.
Excellent, thank you, Will. Great, I'm Victoria Jetty, and I'm going to call this meeting of the Addison Central School District Board to order today, Monday, October 24th. Why don't we start with introductions on my right?
Peter Burrows, Superintendent. Will Hatch, Technology Director.
Chip Malcolm.
Area there, Noble.
Jamie McCallum.
Barb Wilson. Joanna Doria.
Mary Gill.
Steve Orzek.
Jen Newseater.
Brian Bauer.
Eddie Fallis.
Suzanne Buck.
And I'm Victoria Jetty. We have Peter on Zoom.
Peter Conlon.
Great. And do we see Lindsay? No, not yet. I know he does.
That's scary.
And administrators in the back, if you could introduce yourself.
Nicole Carter, Director of Equity and Student Services. Caitlin Steele, Assistant Superintendent of Teaching and Learning. Heather Crowley, Executive Assistant.
Matt Correnti, Business Manager.
Great, thank you very much. At this time, we'll open it up to public comment. As always, this is a time for the public, both in the room as well as online, to make a statement for the board. If we have a number of people, we'll keep it to our 3-minute recommended time. If anybody on Zoom wants to make a public comment, please raise your Zoom hand, and we will start with public comment in the room. So if anyone is here for public comment, please raise your hand. Tanya?
Hi everyone, I'm Tanya Scuteri from Shoreham, and a lot of you have seen me before, know who I am, and oftentimes I'm here voicing concerns or voicing criticism. And today I just want to say thank you. I really appreciate that the board is considering a charter change and exploring that option. And a special thank you to the committee, because it's clearly a ton of work that has gone into gathering this information and presenting it today. So I just wanted to share my gratitude and say how much that's appreciated. And hopefully the next step is to engage with the community on what that charter change looks like. But just a big thank you.
Thank you. Yes, next.
My name is Miller Cox. I'm from Ripon, and I'm here for myself. First of all, I want to thank you as well for considering a charter change. And I've looked at the work that you've done. It's quite impressive. And it gives a good overview of how different districts around the state are chartered. I also am here to read a statement from Elizabeth Toder. She could not be here, but I will read her statement to you. Unfortunately, I could not attend tonight's ACSD meeting in person because I have a 5- and 7-year-old who need to eat dinner and prepare for school tomorrow. But these children are exactly the point why I have become a vocal member of the grassroots community, working to keep our rural schools, and consequently why I follow the board's decisions so closely. Like many parents, I moved to our house with an eye on the local school. Our school is everything, she writes from Cornwall. Our school is everything and more that we could have hoped for. My children love going to school every day. More than that, the school has so many ways for the community to be engaged and involved. This fall has been incredible, and how many activities are offered that provide us a chance to be involved in our children's education. The community really thrives on this involvement and interaction, and I've heard similar comments from parents of other schools who likewise relish and guard precious the chance to be intimately involved in the neighborhood school. Our whole family thrives on it. We all do. Thank you, Elizabeth Toder, Cornwall. And she includes her phone number here. May I give this to someone in case you want to respond?
I'd be happy to take it. I'm the clerk.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone else? Yes.
Yeah, I'm Peter Lynch from Shoreham, and I'm going to start with my select board hat on. I think you may have received a letter from us and the select board. Thank you very much for considering this charter change, because we view it as being absolutely critical to bringing the sense of community back to our schools. I can say that the select board as a whole supports this charter change to allow local towns to vote on school closures. And based on our town meeting 2 years ago, when there was a non-binding resolution to the same effect with about 80 people on the floor, that was a unanimous yes. No abstentions, no nays, no. And if I take off my select board hat and speak personally a little bit, I think, I'm very concerned about the sense of democracy in this country, including here. And for several years now, our small towns have felt very much isolated, excluded, separated from the politics of the school district. And this charter change would go a long way to repairing that. It would become incumbent upon the school directors to present a solid argument to a town, and I believe it can be done, that says that closing their school to reconfigure would actually improve the value of the school district to their children. And voters in Ripton and Shoreham and other small towns are not stupid. They will, a good argument like that will be listened to and heard. And that would feel like the towns are really part of the decision, whereas with the current configuration, we don't. So I thank you very much for taking the time to look at this seriously. I understand the committee's done a tremendous amount of work, and I know what that feels like, so thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? On Zoom, Will, can you?
Yeah, Dee Bertolf.
Hi, yes, thank you. My name is Denise Berthollis. I'm a mom of a fourth grader in Shoreham. I just had a quick 3 points. The first, I just wanted to also back everyone who's talking about the charter, and also thank the email that came out today from the school board in Victoria. It was just really nice to be getting communication across the district, and I really would like to see the board send out more formal emails, communications to the community, and also administrators, not just from our local schools, but from moms to high school, and allow all parents to see that communication. I just feel if we're going to be a united district, it's just good for everyone to get that communication and to feel like we're all in this together. The second point I wanted to bring up was the actual school board meetings. I know a lot has been done with finding meanings in words and documents and making sure all the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed. Some of the kind of in-depth and in the weeds material, I was wondering if that could stay in committee meetings or to have a separate meeting to allow that time that everyone feels that all of this needs to be discussed. I just feel at times the school board meetings can get bogged down and long. And I just want us to feel as parents and community members that we can be involved at every step. And then my third and final point had to do with transportation. Currently, some of us schools have been getting robocalls stating that our children will not be picked up, and it falls on the families to get our kids to school on certain days. And I just feel as a school district, we need to do better and have a backup plan and a backup plan to that backup plan, and make sure that all kids have transportation to and from school every day. No questions asked. I understand problems happen, buses break down, bus drivers get sick, but as a school district, I just feel that we need to do our due diligence to make sure that the transportation is running every day, and that if we're going to start consolidating schools in the future, that this might be even a bigger hurdle in transportation to get kids to schools that are even farther and longer away from their homes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Tim O'Leary. Tim.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Great. Thanks so much. My name's Tim O'Leary from Ripton, and I'm here tonight with specific interest in your conversations around the ad hoc committee's work and the potential changes perhaps to Article 14. I thank you for that work. I was really impressed, as I wrote to you a few weeks ago, with that meeting back maybe late August, where this really came to the fore. I think Steve was there from RSD, and it was like a really organic conversation. I felt like for the first time in years on this topic, where the board really kind of embraced, like perhaps this is the time to really suss this out and think through it. So thank you. I'd also advocate that as you think through this, that really I bring this value, but I think it's shared widely, that a potential change should really include the balancing of being a single educational community. And I've heard that phrase come from both the board chair and other members, and I think it's really important. But also at the same time to hold on to the value of individual town identities. And I think any potential charter change that would, I would say, appease the majority of the electorate around this is going to really have to hold on to both of those. And at the end of the September 28th State Board of Ed meeting, Dr. Tammy Colby, who at the end of that meeting became the chair of the State Board of Ed, leaned into the Mount Abe Union School District and asked them if they would invite Lincoln back with, and I quote her, with the conditions that limit an SD from closing a school without approval of those towns' voters. So Tammy Colby's words exactly kind of put to that board. And I think it's important to note that even in the highest echelons of school administration in this state, they're really considering, like, how do we be that single educational community and value individual town identities? We're not alone in this, for sure. I think it's really important that we try and hold on to both of those and find a way to walk forward. So thank you again, and I look forward to the discussion.
Great. Thank you, Tim.
Okay, Michelle Lefters.
Hi,
Hi,
Michelle.
So my name is Michelle Lefters. I'm a parent and volunteer for a child at Mary Hogan in Middlebury. And I thought it was important to weigh in as a Middlebury resident on this creation of the ad hoc committee to change the charter. I want to commend the board for creating this committee. I think that this is a really important issue for all the residents of the districts. I also wanted to echo the person who spoke before regarding the email that was sent out, sort of outlining business of the board. I found that really helpful in trying to keep up to date with everything that's going on. But as a Middlebury resident, I want to voice my support to change the charter so that all towns can vote on whether or not their schools close. I think in order to make this idea of becoming a unified district a reality, we have to respect and acknowledge the autonomy of every town in making these decisions. So if for some reason Mary Hogan was being considered for closure, I would absolutely want to voice that process, even if it was just to affirm the decision. And while I'm a taxpayer in Middlebury, I'm not really afraid that rural towns are going to be that fiscally irresponsible and vote to keep a failing school open. Most parents just want what's best for their kids, and I think that we need to give individual towns that choice. So thank you for making this committee, and I'm looking forward to seeing how everything pans out.
Thank you. Anyone else? Oh, great. All right, with that, I would like to,
Can you just
sorry.
scroll down, Will, just to make sure nobody on the bottom of the list is waiting.
The hand raises you to the top.
Yeah.
Oh, it does, okay.
Yeah.
Steve. What's up? Are we good?
Oh, they're just trying to move Tim back.
Okay, so we're all set.
My name is Steve Cash. I am currently the chair of the Ripton School Board for a couple months or two. I don't know, whenever the State Board of Ed reverses their decision. I didn't come with prepared remarks tonight. I think what Michelle just said, I don't know Michelle, but I think I would echo a lot of the sentiments she expressed. And I really, want to thank the board. I'm glad that Ripton had a place to come back to and that we can hopefully move forward. I hope that we can be an example to a lot of people around the state potentially of working through differences of opinion and moving forward in what we think is best. And one thing I would say is Ripton had a vote to rejoin the ACSD. And I think this could be a very different scenario if Ripton didn't have that vote. And Ripton made that choice, that was the decision. And I just would encourage all of you, as you do this work, to think about kind of the balancing act of the benefits of giving someone that ability to vote and that authority, and then also kind of what that does for the strength of the overall structure. And I think kind of what Michelle said to some extent, that balancing. And so I wish this board the best of luck, and I just hope we can figure this out and set a good example. I think in some ways we already have, and I'm kind of glad to be back here. There is a certain amount of trepidation that I say that with. We'll see what you all discuss tonight and go from there. So, thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
Just real quick, Jamie brought up, do we want to read the attendees off the list? We've done that in the past. So.
Sure.
Thank you.
Okay, Adrian, Allison Nurok. Forget.
Denise.
Deb Pinkerton, Emily Blistine, Matt Flinner, MCTV, Michelle Fay, Molly Witters, Stephen Zwicky, Tim O'Leary, and Wendy.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. All right. And with that, Lindsay.
Is it possible to keep the attendees up there so we know who's in the virtual room while we're in the meeting?
I think if you want to see Peter, well, yeah, like that, I mean.
Yeah, we might even be able to move it smaller, but.
Okay, we're going to move on from public comment and welcome our new student rep. Eddie Fallis is joining us for a 2-year stint, right? 2 years. first of many meetings. Terrific. We are glad that you're here and appreciate your time and service to this board.
Thank you.
Do you want to say anything?
Well, I was just wondering, Eddie, do you want to share a little bit about why you were so excited about this position and kind of what you're hoping to both give, learn, just kind of like an overview of kind of what got you here?
Well, I like politics to an extent, and I like being involved with stuff. So on a small scale, this is pretty interesting to me personally. But my mom, I'm sure a few of you know her, is Amy Clapp. She's a teacher at Salisbury, and I've been pretty informed on what the board's doing. So I'm pretty excited to be able to at least have some say on what I think as a student about some of the decisions and ideas that are presented. So I'm excited to get started.
Great.
Thank you.
All right. With that, can I get a recommendation to approve the minutes of 10:10?
I'll make a recommendation.
I'll second.
Thank you. Any questions or comments about the minutes? Yes, Barb?
When we were having discussion about the secondary school facilities report, during the meeting, I had mentioned where people could find the full report. And so I'm wondering if somehow we can maybe put the link in here, because there's few graphs that are attached to the meeting minutes are very, brief. So maybe just a link, if that would work out okay.
Can we do that in board pack? I don't think.
No,
I'm not sure that we can do a live link in
we
board
can't put a
pack.
live link in board pack out.
But you could list the full URL presumably.
Yeah.
Maybe,
Right.
maybe,
Okay.
Yeah.
so they can cut and paste.
So that's what I'll do.
Thank you,
Okay.
thank you. Appreciate that.
Any other questions or comments about the minutes? Okay, without seeing any, all those in favor of approving the minutes of 10:10, please say aye.
Aye.
Oh, any opposed? Any abstentions? Great, the minutes are approved. Time to approve the bills. Chip?
There was one set of bills read by myself and Barbara. And there was one general fund bill, a large one, $1,571,430.89. Clarifying that large number, 400, this is a really gross number, I didn't get it up on the computer, but I just eyeballed it, and it was about 442,000 from VEHI Health, 22,000 from VEHI Dental, 155,000 to US Bank, and then there's a lot of food service. I mean, there were 20 of the 20 pages of bills, all single-spaced. There was countless numbers of bills on food service, so they are all small. But at times they come in bunches, so that 1,571,000 plus, it's a big number, but it tends to vary depending on some of the big things that come up at certain points. The next three are payroll. First one for $930,149.47. The next one for $566.63. And the last one for $1,242.27. Barbara and I reviewed those bills and I make a motion that they are okay to be paid.
And I'll second that.
Great, thank you. Any questions or comments for the finance
I have
team?
a question. Are we still providing meals to universally to every student? We are. Is that through that
Just
federal
through this-
grant?
This fiscal year, no, the federal grant ended and then we covered it statewide through
Okay,
essentially ESSER funds.
okay. But it's only
It's
till
gonna
the end
be
of
like
this year.
one of the big topics in the coming session.
That's what I thought. I thought that they were gonna mandate that to continue, yeah? And that we
Well,
have to
they
pay
have
for it,
to- They have
basically.
to fund the money for it.
Yeah.
That's the issue.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions or comments about the bills? Seeing none, all those in favor of approving the bills, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Great, we'll pay the bills. Dr. Burrows.
All right. Well, I will keep it somewhat brief with my initial remarks because we've got a lot on the agenda tonight. I looked at staff attendance data after the last meeting and student attendance data to just kind of see where we are kind of pre-COVID versus now. And I've shared that we've had a really challenging time with substitutes, and a lot of folks have done 2 or 3 things. They used to focus on one thing, and it's been kind of a shell game in keeping coverage in some of our schools, really all of our schools, depending on the day. Our numbers are roughly 20%, like staff attendance is 20% higher, meaning a 20% additional number of absences compared to like pre-COVID. So when you look at the start of this fall and the colds, and a number of people have had COVID, which is a 5-day quarantine, that has had a big impact. So I think what we're experiencing anecdotally also plays out in the data in terms of just it being a bit harder. And then with some of our open support staff positions, which we're continuing to work on to try to figure out how to repackage those or bring folks in. The combining effect is having, I think, some pressure on the system, and I think everybody's feeling it to some degree. I do think that we are in a stronger place than we were when we were doing this same thing last year. I think we've all kind of experienced a little bit more buoyancy in our lives and in our community, and that's certainly playing out in our schools too. But this is something that all of our colleagues are experiencing. When I talk with other districts, they're all talking about the same kind of things. Transportation was brought up in public comment today. Board members got the gift of those phone calls after you were added to the listserv. And you got to hear Matt's mellifluous voice in the morning at, what time was that, 6?
6:45.
As a reminder, we contract out our transportation with Betcha. And so, for example, on that early morning, we got a phone call at 5:30 saying we can't find a substitute. So they're experiencing some of the same issues that we are. And I think, this is across all sectors right now too. It's not just schools, it's not just, it's all companies and all organizations right now. We are in the process of finding a new food service director. Laura Lavaca took a position in Burlington. It was great for her. It was, kind of a step up in terms of more responsibility, a larger district. So we wished her well, and we are in the hiring process now and are hopeful that we'll have someone within the next month and have a plan to kind of make a pathway between here and the hiring of that new position. And I'll leave it at that, so we can get into all of our presentations.
Yeah, just a quick question. Like for the sub situation, what's the sense for how often schools really don't have the subs that they need, and they have to kind of scramble and figure out, okay, how are we gonna cover all of this?
That's pretty common. It often is happening within the building, so people are stepping forward, or if you talk to interventionists, for example, or you talk to people that are in positions that have some flexibility, paraprofessionals, for example, oftentimes are stepping up and substituting. So if there's not anyone that we can find, then a paraprofessional who maybe is in a couple general ed classrooms will move and sub. So there's not one way that happens. There's lots of different ways that those things are solved, but I think that's a pretty normal occurrence right now. Yeah.
Mary Heather?
So, Peter, when a paraprofessional or a teacher, a special ed teacher is out, is it safe to assume that services are not being provided to those students, or do you get subs for those services?
It depends on what the services are, and that drives how we cover those things. Sometimes those aren't covered, sometimes they are. And like I said, it's a kind of individual basis in terms of what the services are and if it's written into an IEP and how that works. So it's really kind of dependent on each situation. But finding para substitutes is really, really challenging. So oftentimes there's the same thing that happens with the classroom where you might have 3 people, you might have a counselor helping, you might have someone else coming in and leaning in. So you might have a team of covering one person's job for that day. You might have 2 or 3 people helping to cover that. And I know those of you that were in schools last year saw this in action all the time.
Since transportation has come up, who is handling the nitty-gritty of the transportation? Is it the business manager that deals with the problems and finance? Who is it?
So we have both a district kind of oversight of transportation, which is our director of finance and operations, Matt. We also, a lot of that work happens at the principal level. I would say the majority of that work is happening at the principal level, where the principal is working directly with the driver if there's any issue or student conduct concerns, anything like that. The principal is really the lead on a lot of that. Principals are sometimes being contacted directly by Dee, who is the person who leads the kind of operations of VETCHA for the 3 districts in Addison County and maybe Slate Valley too.
I know that the transportation company has made a request a couple of times in regards to one of the schools. And there was going to be a committee set up this summer. It has not been set up. And the drivers and the company are still dealing with the same problems. And I'm wondering what's the best way to deal with that situation.
So anytime like something like that happens and, either a meeting doesn't happen or, sometimes there are differences of opinion, right, too, where, any one of our contractors might say, we would like the school district to do this, and we generally have a meeting, talk through it, and try to determine what works for both parties.
Right.
If that hasn't happened, then, sometimes as superintendent, I will be pinged and get involved and try to help facilitate that kind of conversation.
Thank you.
Joanna.
Did you say you also were looking at student attendance data?
Yeah.
And how is that trending?
It was a little bit harder to read because some years, and I can share this data with all of you. Some years it was like 83% for one cohort, and the next year it was 95%, and I'm not sure what I couldn't see a real pattern in it, so it was harder for me to decipher. But the reality of this past 2 to 3 months has been a lot of sickness, a lot of people out. I think has been what we've been experiencing between COVID and it seems like this cold that just kind of has gripped our community for a couple of months.
All right. Any other questions or comments? Let's move on.
Okay. I believe Eric Remsen, who's here to discuss the bike pump track. This is something I would have loved as a kid. I used to race BMX. This would have been amazing, but it didn't happen.
You can still use it.
I could still go work there.
That would be awesome.
As a 50-plus guy.
Yeah.
Of course, we don't
Be
get
there.
as quickly as we get older.
I know.
Hi, everyone. My name is Eric Remsen. I'm here on behalf of the Middlebury Bike Pump Track Group. And you had kind of the information that's on the screen in your packet. So I'll try to just kind of touch on some of the highlights here. So this project actually came out of work that started with the district's Community Partnership Council during kind of the past 2 years, looking at how to provide kind of fun, uplifting, Peter mentioned buoyant kind of opportunities for students in the district, ways to kind of provide joy. And so that's kind of where this project started. Since then, other kind of partners have come on board. Addison County Bike Club, ACDC, has been kind of a really big part of this. And so the project is to build a bike pump track in Middlebury Recreation Park that would be accessible for, kind of free and accessible for all members of the community. So briefly, a bike pump track, if you don't know what it is, it's a kind of usually a looped course of rollers and kind of berm turns that bikers can use. And the purpose of it, obviously the first purpose is fun, but it's also really good skill building for cyclists to kind of deal with going over rollers and going around kind of bank turns. And it so kind of builds those skills, builds that confidence for people who use it. So we are looking to build this hopefully next year. This project would be funded entirely through some grants as well as a crowdfunding campaign. That's how it would be paid for. The approximate cost is $20,000. We've been working with a designer builder to kind of come up with a design. And then we've also had kind of conversations with the town of Middlebury. As you may know, Middlebury Recreation Park is owned by the school district, and that's why I'm here tonight, but it's managed by the town. So we've talked with Parks and Rec about this. We've kind of identified a spot there that's not allocated for anything else in the town's kind of rec park master plan. It's just green space. It's between the pool and the fields. And so that's, so we're kind of working on kind of getting everything ready so that we can kind of crowdfund and raise kind of the remainder of the money that we need to build this. Yeah, so I guess I'm here tonight kind of looking for school board approval because this is a district-owned property, and so we need kind of the landowner to agree to have this kind of constructed. And I guess the other thing I'll add is that in terms of kind of once it gets built, ACDC, who has been a big part of this project, is willing to do the upkeep and maintenance that's required. With the pump track, it would probably be kind of pretty minimal. This track would be made of dirt. There would be, there may be some kind of vegetation in the middle of the track. Those of you that have seen, there's a similar pump track in Bristol. This would look probably something like that one in Bristol. And then we've also kind of talked with the town. The town has kind of various recreational facilities already in the park. They have liability insurance for that. This would kind of fall under their liability insurance the way the ball fields or the playgrounds or the tennis courts, those things all do. So we've kind of worked out those issues and kind of have a plan for those issues as well. So that's kind of briefly my kind of brief presentation. If you have questions based on what you kind of saw or what I said. Yeah.
Where's the one in Bristol? I know the one right in the front on the road looks like a skateboard.
Right, it's tucked behind that.
Okay,
It's
so
kind of, it's right
I will
next-
look when I'm there next time. I was not aware of that.
Yeah, it's kind of around the corner from where that skate park is.
Lindsay?
Are there other locations being considered, because that space is used by several programs that I know of? The swim team, that's where they do all their dry land practice. Athletico Middlebury, they have 4 teams that straddle that area when they're doing their practices. And that's a spring and fall program. And they've already had to take the U12 out and put it at the middle school fields, which they don't have lights there. And I know the Middlebury Rec soccer program also uses that space. So I'm just wondering, are there other spaces that aren't in use by numerous programs? The school also uses it for the mileage club and other PE programs.
So I think it would be, so this is kind of the spot that working with Dustin and the Parks and Rec Committee that they kind of picked out. It actually sits on the other side of the light post that lights the field. And it's not, this is an area that's not marked as kind of the soccer field. It's where they kind of mark the soccer fields is not kind of part of this particular segment that we're looking at. It wouldn't be fully fenced in, so Mileage Club would still be able to kind of do the route that they do up to the path there and then kind of around. I think there'd be room for them to kind of go through. So it was, I don't know, we kind of, this was the site that kind of with the Parks and Rec Committee and Dustin that kind of we selected as the one that made the most sense.
I love the idea of the project. I just wonder what other, like behind the rec park, there's some space in between the lacrosse fields. I'm sure you guys have already done your due diligence, but I love the idea of it. And I know it would get a ton of use, but I just wonder where those other programs will end up going. Because I know what you mean by the lighting and everything, but it's, it's not part of the marked fields, but all the U6, U8 kids go there. And the little guys.
When will your design be ready?
I don't know, I don't have it, we have like a concept for it, but we don't have kind of a design that fits in that kind of square. That's something we're working with the designer builder on kind of firming up.
So your SES approval on the concept?
On the use of that space.
It's our land.
It's our land.
No, I understand that, but we don't know what it's gonna look like. That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I think that generally the pump track, they all are sort of a similar look. And this would just be giving permission for use of the square footage.
Without the design.
Yeah. Mary?
Eric, I have a question. Sounds like the liability will be held by the rec department, correct?
Yeah.
Are they going to supervise it, or is it going to be people just come and use it?
This would be, yeah, it would be kind of, they would be able to just come in, people would be able to use it when they want to. It's part of the grants that we're pursuing kind of specify that it should be free, that it shouldn't be something that's charged. So it would be open to the public the way kind of, I guess in some ways it would function the way the fields function in that they when, I think Dustin has kind of a calendar in terms of when Athletico can use it versus rec. And so if there are clinics that ACDC wanted to hold on the track, then that would kind of go through Dustin. But in general, when it's not kind of reserved for a clinic or anything like that, then it would be.
Well, I guess my question is, there's inherent danger in some of this for just no supervision. And I just wonder, is there going to be somebody supervising when students or whoever's riding on it is there? I mean.
Well, it's like a skate park.
You kind of like use it at your own risk.
Right, it would be, I think it would function the same way, kind of I think there's that same risk if you're on the playground outside of kind of school hours when it's not being supervised, or even like if you're using the soccer field or the baseball field, I think it kind of falls into that same category. Those are, if they're not being used by a team, you're able to use them, but those sports, those activities have kind of some inherent risk in them.
Yeah, it just seems like this might have more. The other thing is, are there going to be bikes available for kids who don't necessarily have their own bike so that it's open?
I would hope someday down the road that would be possible. We've had like some initial conversations with the teen center around kind of some, because that is right there around how that might look. But no, I guess not in the short term, but that would be the hope. And I know that I also know that the PE teachers at Mary Hogan would want to utilize it. I think it's kind of their culminating thing at the end of when they have the bike trailers. So yeah, hopefully we could kind of work on something to have bikes available for those who don't have bikes, but that would be, I think, longer term.
I just have a follow-up question on the liability. Do you know if there's a limit to liability or what the limit to liability is for the town? Is it something that you guys have looked into?
No, it's not something we've looked into.
Jen?
Can you talk a little bit more about if there's a backup plan, if ACBC is not ultimately able to continue maintaining it in the long term? I'm not sure about that organization. Maybe it's gonna be in existence for eternity, but if it sounds like it's, kind of a smaller group of folks that.
Yeah, so so at the moment, they have part of what they do as a club is maintain trails on Chipman Hill. So it's kind of, they have monthly work days where they're maintaining stuff. So I think kind of, medium to short term, that they're pretty stable. They want to kind of build this into their work days. We have kind of a business that's providing kind of some of the grant funds, and part of that, they want to, there's kind of a volunteer stipulation as part of that grant that their employees would volunteer to do kind of some of this work as well. So there's kind of that business that would chip in. It's something that maintenance wise, if for some reason ACBC disappeared in 2 years, I think the rec department could pick it up. The maintenance would be pretty minimal. I think there's also, I think there are a number of different, because the maintenance wouldn't be that much, there are a number of different groups or organizations, including, including in the district itself, whether it's through Days of Caring, whether it's through kind of some other volunteer things that could take on that maintenance, because it is kind of probably a day or so of maintenance that would keep it going for that season.
I guess I would just encourage you to think about that and build that into the longer term plan. Say there's a big storm, the whole thing gets washed out. If you're saying it's mostly dirt, I'm just a little concerned that land then becomes just a mess. If it's not sustainable by this organization or, volunteers.
Right, and I think
basis.
Dustin Parks and Rec is kind of planning for that, I think, in terms of kind of his budgeting.
Okay.
Is kind of.
That's kind of what I want to hear.
Yeah. So, I should have said that to him. He is kind of thinking about that with his budget on kind of.
A contingency plan. Thank you.
All right, 2 more questions, then we'll move on.
So you say that you're aiming to raise $6,000 through crowdfunding in order to get that $12,000 grant. What happens if December 31st comes around and you're not at that $6,000? Does this whole thing fall apart, or do you have a plan B in place?
So if December 31st rolls around and we haven't kind of met that goal, I guess the push to get it done by December 31st is partly thinking about this particular grant program, Better Places, and these kind of grants open up each calendar year, and we want to get in under the gun or by the end of the year for this year, so that another organization in the town of Middlebury could theoretically apply for that same grant next year for some project of theirs. If we're not there and we carry over, then we kind of take that spot that could be filled by another organization next year. And so that's kind of our push to get it done this year, so that door is open for somebody else with a good idea for placemaking in the town next year.
Awesome.
Great, thank you.
Great. Lindsay?
The photograph in the presentation is of a cement track, but this is a dirt track you're proposing?
Correct,
Okay.
yes.
All right, just wanted to clarify.
Yes, yeah, no, that one is cement or paved, and ours would be dirt.
All right. Does everyone feel like they have enough information to get a motion on the table? Would someone like to propose a motion?
I I will move that the school board approve the project of the Middlebury bike pump track at the proposed location.
I'll second it.
Great. Any additional comments or questions? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed?
Nay.
Lindsay? Any abstentions?
And Brian.
Oh, and Brian. And are you an abstention?
Yes.
All right. You're good to go.
Thank you.
Yes, okay, so, this is titled Budget Drivers, and I felt like the way to enter into this budget, the FY '24 budget, it would be helpful to provide more of a long-range view. We've talked over the last months about where we are going into next year, that a lot of the significant changes that we think are coming are happening actually in FY '25, not in FY '24. As we go through this budget and we think about what's coming in '25, we're considering how '24 leads into '25 with the loss of pretty significant federal funding post FY '24, with the onset of Act 173, and that becoming more of a reality. We're in a transitional period. We also have, as you know from the last session, the waiting study, which is now no longer a study. People still call it the waiting study. The change in weights, which will impact our budget negatively, that's phased in as well. So those three things are not impacting us next year, but they will be very considerable as we look at 25, 26, 27. The new weights are phased in over 5 years, so that will be gradual. 173 is not as transitional, and we've got experts here to talk about it. We have Dr. Steele, Dr. Carter, and Mr. Correnti. So the three of them are going to be sharing and talking about what I just mentioned, and then we'll open for questions.
All right, we're on it. I get to go first and give you another ESSER update. So I've talked to you all about ESSER a few times. And I will share with you the state of our spending on that, and with the specific purpose of foreshadowing when these grants will expire for us and what the implications are for the budgets that we'll be writing this year and next year. After I talk about ESSER, Nicole will come up and give you an update on Act 173, and then Matt will take up the loose ends at the end of this, all the big picture stuff for budget planning. So these grants really started in 2021, and the last of them will run down, as far as we know at this point, September 30th of 2024. You've seen this table before, it's slightly updated. You can see ESSER 1, the period of performance end was September 30th of this year. So in the summer and last spring, we were reconciling that grant to make sure that we had maximized it, and ended up having a few small investments. We called them joy grants, I think is how we spent some of it. We funded some small field trips and artisan residencies, really to make sure that we, within the spirit of those grants, spent the formula money that we had coming to us. So that is done. ESSER 1 is finished. I suspect we probably got some reporting to do as we finalize the numbers on it, but for all intents and purposes, that's done for us. ESSER 2 is the bigger grant. You can see here what they're worth. This one, interestingly, changed by some hundreds of dollars. We got a few $100s more. I have no idea why, but it's a little bit bigger. But you can see what we got in each of those. We've done our initial applications for ESSER 2, ARP IDEA, and ARP ESSER, but we haven't fully budgeted ARP ESSER. November 1st of this year is the deadline to have that fully done. So in fact, Kathy Roberts and I have been working behind the scenes to finish that application. It's almost ready to go, but I just asked her to wait until we'd gotten through this board meeting in case any changes came out of this conversation today. So we have until summer to do our final amendments for ESSER 2, and we need to have that spent by the end of September next year. And then we anticipate a final amendment timeline of July 2024 for ARP ESSER, spending the last of that money by September of 2024. So notice that that means that we can be funding positions through next school year, not through the school year after, because we don't want to employ somebody just through September 30th. Okay, so that's the basic timeline. Just as a refresher, this is what we spent ESSER 1 on. So we had an SEL coordinator, we hired a literacy coordinator, our preschool and childhood transitions coordinator, prevention specialist at Shoreham, that's a social worker working on site there, an elementary literacy interventionist, which is actually partially funded across multiple buildings, but it's the equivalent of one full-time person. And this is those educational enrichment mini grants that I was talking about, the JOY grants that we spent down the last of those dollars with. And we also used a little bit of that, the last of that money to fund some curriculum collaboration focused on middle level math. We paid teachers to come together in the summer and work on that curriculum, and we bought them some textbooks for the whole math department at MUMS. And we brought some nurses and counselors and teachers together to collaborate this summer on a coordinated health curriculum. So that's what we did with ESSER 1. ESSER 2 is these grants get bigger as we go. This is a longer list. I won't read all of them, but you'll see that we used ESSER 2 to fund a second year of multiple positions. So our literacy coordinator for a second year, our preschool coordinator for a second year, right? And so you can see a continuation. Our behavior interventionists, they were funded last year in ESSER 2, and we also funded them for this year in ESSER 2. And you'll see that there's a proposal to fund them for one more year in ARP ESSER as we go forward. So I don't want to read through the whole list, but you will have access to this. It shouldn't be a lot of new information for you because we've seen it before. You'll see that we are leaning in here to middle school math and curriculum collaboration. And you'll see we increased that with ARP ESSER based on feedback from our last conversation. Any questions on ESSERs 1 and 2? Yeah, Steve.
Could I ask you to give us a sense of how much of the ESSER money is involved in positions and how much is not involved in positions?
So I haven't done the math on the total that's spent in positions, but you will see several slides on the positions that are funded and when that funding runs dry. And I'd be happy to, the information is actually in our public plan for our ESSER spending, which will be, we just linked in here, but I haven't added it exactly how you're asking for it. So if after this you still have questions, feel free to pepper me in here, and behind the scenes I'll do a little math for you. Yep.
Question?
Yeah, I do.
Well, I feel like I should know this, but like someone who is a coordinator, what exactly do they do?
Yeah. So coordinators largely are liaisons between teachers and administrators. So our IB coordinators organize most of the professional development and curriculum collaboration for teachers to oversee our IB curriculum. Our literacy coordinator has done a ton of work auditing the materials that we have in all of our classrooms for the programs we've adopted, using grant money to purchase all of the materials that we need and getting those out to teachers so everybody has complete kits, analyzing the gaps in that curriculum, bringing teachers together to write the scope and sequence to close those gaps. I mean, really, really phenomenal behind the scenes organization of materials, supplies, budgets, and time for teachers. So often they're the person standing at the front of the room or sitting at the head of the table, facilitating collaboration among teachers or professional learning. So they rarely work directly with students unless they're in a classroom modeling a lesson or giving the teacher feedback on what's happening. They are more and more this year as we engage data to understand how effective our systems are. They're in the room in those conversations with administrators. So they wear a lot of different hats. Did that clarify enough for you? It's different by position too.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Were all of the ESSER positions able to be filled?
No, they'll get that in the upcoming slides.
And then I had just another quick question on the mini grants, the JOY funds. Was Keek part of that?
Yeah, we paid for some of Keek with that.
Okay.
Barb?
Yeah.
it's great to see the middle school math collaboration there. Have we done anything at the elementary school level? Because
Well,
that's,
see, we propose it in ARP-ESSER.
okay. Thank you
I'm
for
yes,
listening.
yes. So let's look at ARP-ESSER. This is the big one, right, that we get to spend for the longest. As a refresher, we really organized our investments under 3 broad categories: mental health, social emotional learning, positive behavior supports is the first one, supporting access and success in academic learning, and healthy schools / indoor air quality. And remember, this is the only one where when we want to make a change to how we plan to spend this money, we also have to change this public plan for ARP-ESSER spending. So I have updated that based on the proposals you're about to see. It's linked here, and after tonight, we'll post it online and open it for public comment. So it will be open for public comment. I think I wrote in there through December 7th, just to give people plenty of time. But we will move forward with our investments after this conversation, just because it takes time to get the grants approved. So we'll submit an application based on what we come up with tonight. And then if their public comment suggests that we make changes, we'll adjust. We have until July of 2024 to continue to update and perfect this over time. So it's not really a significant time crunch. We've just got some investments that we want to get approved so we can start spending them. Okay, so this is a hot link to the updated report. It looks just like the public plan for ARP-ESSER spending, except where I've made changes, I've indicated them in bright red font. So somebody could read through it quickly and see the recommended changes. Jen?
You're mentioning the hot link as if we have access to this PowerPoint, which I don't believe we do.
I think you don't, but you will.
Okay. Thank you.
We'll make sure that this is publicly available.
Fabulous.
So remember, these are 3 categories. So I have a slide for each of the 3 categories because this big grant has a lot of investments involved. So you know that we have a prevention specialist at Shoreham. This proposes that we continue that position for 1 more year. It's already approved in the public plan, and I'm not sure if we've written it into the actual grant system, but that doesn't really need our approval at this point. So we last year requested a second social worker / prevention specialist to strengthen services, a position much like the one at Shoreham, but not anchored to a particular space, so we can get those services anywhere we need them in the district. We have not been able to hire that position. It is currently funded in ARP-ESSER for 2 years. So if we don't succeed in funding that, we will need to reallocate at least these. If we don't succeed in hiring it, we'll need to reallocate at least those funds. And we'll want to look at that pretty soon, because when we don't hire a person, that's a pretty big chunk of money to reallocate. So we'll want to do that in preparation for next year, not partway through next year when it will be hard to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars in a less planful way. So this is a proposed change to what we've already approved. We fund the behavior interventionists at MUMS for another year. Here's another one we haven't been able to fill. We said that we wanted to hire an additional part-time school counselor so that at the elementary schools are small schools who share school counselors across multiple buildings. We wanted to have a counselor who's currently serving 3 buildings, serve only 2, so she can spend more time there. So we needed to hire another counselor, right? The funny shared positions math. So we were looking for a part-time counselor. We have not yet been able to hire that. We renewed the posting. We have a couple of applicants. We'll be reviewing those soon. So again, if we're not able to fill it, we'll want to consider reallocating those funds. It's currently, the intention is to fill that position for this year and next year. If we don't hire somebody for this year, we'll have to make a hard decision about whether we want to hire somebody for 1 year only or not. We had already approved the retention bonuses for faculty and staff. They've already received the first of those checks, and they get the second one in January, I believe, right? So proposed that yes.
That's 22-23 though.
Yes, so that was for this year. The retention bonuses were we're paying people an additional bonus to come back this year. So it's already approved in the grant.
School year 22-23.
This is 22-23.
Oh my God. That feels like it's next year. That's so scary. Okay, I'm with you.
I started referring to that as time dysmorphia.
Wow, I have
We're all
it.
feeling it. Okay, so we We have a Dean of Culture and Climate. She is funded in ESSER 2 for this school year. This proposes that we fund that position for one more year in ARP ESSER to help moms continue their transition into sort of smoother waters. This proposes that we spend a little bit of money on more of those educational enrichment projects, guest artists, more artists coming into spring into the arts, which we're running again for this year at the MAC on the campus for the first time since 2019. And evidence-based mindfulness training for educators. So those are the proposals under mental health, social, emotional learning. Any questions about that or? Yeah, Mary Heather?
Just a quick question. If you're unable to fill the positions for some of these, proposed behavior interventionists or school counselors, can some of this money be used to contract that work, or is that not allowed, or is that it's not allowed?
Well, we can't contract any unionized association position. So if it's a
Gotcha.
counselor, we can't contract out a
Gotcha.
counselor because it's within our master contract that we can't do that.
So even if we can't fill the needed position, we can't
There
find
are
those
some
services
positions we
elsewhere.
can contract out and some that we can't, just kind of based on whether they're a position that's within the master contract or not. So that's what
Gotcha.
basically determines if we can contract it or not.
So probably no. Okay.
Thank you. Just a quick question relative to the size of the different ESSER grants. That number was a number that we applied for, or that number was said, you can get this number. I don't know how they figured it out I don't know what the variables they used to figure out what that number comes from, but we are applying for that number.
These are formula grants. Just like our title grants, the state has a formula by which they determine how much, they get a big pot of federal money, and they have a formula by which they determine what slice of that federal money they give to each school district. So it'll be based on things like our enrollment and our free and reduced price lunch. And
But that number is not our number, that's somebody else's
they
number
give
that
us
we
the
apply
number,
for.
and
Okay.
we apply to spend it in certain ways.
Okay, that's all I was asking.
Yep.
Thank you.
Any other questions on? Yes, Joanna?
Just a quick, sorry,
Go
Barbara.
ahead.
A clarifying question. So the second principle at MOMS is budget. It's not an
We have
ESSER.
2 locally funded principals,
Okay.
and we have a grant funded dean.
Got it.
Barb?
So with the monies that we've spent thus far and positions and things that we've done, have we been able to do assessment of the effectiveness of that? So that we know, oh, we need to tweak here, we need to, maybe reallocate how we're spending this money so we're getting the most bang from this gift of money that's been given to us.
So we are required always to evaluate our grants. Some of that we do quantitatively and some of it we do qualitatively. As far as the efficacy of our investments, Nicole and I are leading with the principals this year, a pretty deep dive into our data, particularly on math, literacy, and social emotional learning. So that we will be making data-informed recommendations going forward based on that. Interestingly, you may or may not have heard that this is the year that the state has decided we're having a new standardized assessment. So that'll make it challenging to compare, not impossible, but more challenging than normal to compare previous SBAC results to new results of a test that has yet to be named. So it's imperfect, I would say, yeah, but we're doing our best at that. Yeah, Jamie.
A proposed thing, how does that become, what's the deal?
Yeah, so great question. I've got these up here as proposed because this is the first time that we're talking about these ideas publicly. All of the rest of them were already published in our public plan for ARP ESSER spending, right? So the ones that were ESSER 1 and ESSER 2, we summarized those in that plan to make a context for how we were proposing that we spend ARP ESSER. And then we actually proposed them in our first public spending plan, which we published last spring. And that was open for public comment, and we read all the public comment, and we adjusted behind the scenes. So this is the first time that you and the public will get to see, here's what we're thinking now. And this conversation will inform what we go back and actually write into the grant management system for our ESSER. And then the opportunity for the public to make comment will also affect our reflective practice. In the end, we as an administrative team actually get to make the decisions about what gets written in.
Okay,
This is really an exercise in transparency and feedback.
cool, thank you.
Yes.
Sorry. Under the proposed educational enrichment, how do you make sure that those funds are being spread out equitably across the district?
So last year, we specifically wrote those joy grants for small rural schools because they didn't have access to the McJilton funds. And so they couldn't fund some of the joyful outdoor, arts-oriented field trips and such, and artisan residencies that they wanted to do. So what we did was we set aside this much money. I let the principals know, here's the form you can apply, and our rural school principals were the only people invited to spend that money. This year, we're actually thinking about spending it in really targeted ways. So thinking about what is the thing that we would like to bring to every school, and can we use this money to do that? And Spring Into the Arts is obviously a program that's for all ACSD students, mostly elementary, but really for all ACSD students. So we'll be making those decisions centrally about the things that we hope will be the most impactful and equitably distributed. Any other questions on this? We've got 2 more categories to get through.
We get the hint.
So here's supporting access and success in learning. This is our more academic version. You can see here that we've been working really hard to hire a literacy interventionist at the high school. We have been unsuccessful. So this is already funded for this year in ESSER 2, next year in ARPA ESSER, and we will have to reflect if we make it much further through the year and still can't fill that position, then we'll need to reallocate those funds. You'll see proposed a significant investment, an increased investment, I should say, for math professional development and instructional materials. Joanna made a point at our last meeting that really sort of flipped a switch in my thinking about thinking flexibly about the coordinators who are already in our system. So understanding, remember last year we suggested we need a math coordinator to do that big overhaul that the literacy coordinator has done. And it feels really clear that that position is not in the cards, right? Another coordinator position is not on the table at this point based on conversations we've had and public feedback. We wanted more interventionists, not more coordinators. So I brought that back to our team. And the team of existing coordinators have looked at how we made movement on literacy and are trying to replicate that pattern for math. So auditing the programs, making sure that we have all of the materials, considering for our bridges in particular for math, how many people have been trained in that program in the last 5 years. Let's get everybody up to snuff on their training. We can do the same for the middle years program math in terms of training. Really going big on materials, supplies, professional development. And then once we have that foundational program, sort of shored up, then thinking, okay, what's missing? And bringing our teachers together to collaborate on what's the scope and sequence to make sure that we've closed any gaps. So this is suggesting a pretty big investment. I think it's penciled in at $85,000. So no new staff, just with the coordinators we already have in our system saying, can we lift this too? We'll do our best. So let's see, the only other things that are new in here is professional development for paraprofessionals. They have been hard to hire and hard to retain, and one of the things that they've been asking for is a more intentional and coherent approach to providing them with professional learning opportunities. So I'd like to invest some money in that. And then an investment in English learner ELL PD, in particular for our classroom teachers. So we have 2 ELL teachers in the district. We want to strengthen also the English learning instructional practice skills for our classroom teachers. So a little bit of money to support that as well. So those are the proposals in that category. Any questions? Yeah, Barb.
Yeah. Thank you for the math professional development. Kind of a broken record for me. So with that, obviously we can't hire a coordinator, but could there be some kind of consulting services. Like I'm envisioning like a math, an elementary school teacher, maybe I struggled with math myself, right? A lot of people have, right? And sometimes you have, particular students, if you can gear it in the right way that allows them to click, just to come up with ideas, for helping that child move to the next step, because not everyone learns at the same
Sounds like
way.
you're talking about a coaching model.
Yeah.
Where a professional with math expertise comes into the classroom, observes, looks at data, consults with the teacher, and helps with embedded professional
Right.
learning. So absolutely, that kind of model is on the table and under consideration. I am excited that the team is excited to lean in and look at math. And I also really appreciate that this is a team who understands what our teachers are already being asked to do.
Right.
And they've got significant reservations about layering more on.
Right.
So we've done some phenomenal math consulting and coaching in the past before I was here, that teachers who were here still remember and still talk about. And my hope would be that, next year, we've got leaders building that system for subsequent years. And then this year, we really lean into just making sure our foundation is steady, because it feels like that's what our teachers have the capacity to take on this year. Joanna?
Can you speak a little bit about the summer and after-school programming and what that looks like? I mean,
Yes, let me get to it on another slide, and
Okay.
if I don't answer your question, come back to me on it.
Okay.
Any other questions on this one? Okay, this is the one that's easy. Had one investment for healthy schools, indoor air quality. It was all updating the HVAC systems at Mary Hogan. That work is underway. No proposed changes at this point. So that's what we have already planned and have proposed adjusting. They're relatively small adjustments, but again, because it's our ESSER, it has to be public facing and open for public comment.
Can you pause on that slide for a sec? I know that during COVID, that was during the main part of COVID, that was the biggest concern. And that was something that we had all talked about utilizing some of these funds for. Can you talk a little bit more about why Mary Hogan is the only one that's on this? Were other ones addressed earlier? Is there a plan for others?
I'm gonna take a stab at this, and Peter or Matt can correct me, because this is not my domain.
Okay.
I would say Bruce keeps a pretty thoughtful record of the highest priorities of projects in our system, and when we said we're only spending this much, this was the highest priority in terms of the systems that were most in need of updates in a timely fashion.
So there was another grant that we applied for and got during COVID. Well, we're still in COVID, but when they were giving out grants like that for COVID. And we took care of Cornwall, and I believe Weybridge was on the list too. I don't know if it's where that is. Nicole, was that before your?
It was after I left.
Okay. And Bruce is doing these based on what the need is at this, like the age of the HVAC system, and making the recommendations based on that. We did, and Caitlin mentioned this in the last ESSER presentation. In terms of public feedback, there was overwhelming support for positions and very little support for facilities, which is not something that's new. It's what's leading to, increasingly needy buildings that need investment, which is another topic for another
for my
day.
committee.
Yes, for your committee. But anyway, that plays into this investment. We initially had how many, like 3 or 4 fairly large investments for facilities at the beginning.
Okay.
And then we basically just brought it down to what we believe was the most significant.
Bummer.
Now we're looking at budget drivers. And budget drivers, so many of the things that we have spent money on and will spend money on are one-time investments that will carry us for some time. So significant investment in literacy materials and training will carry us for some time. It's not permanently fixed, but it's not a thing we need to necessarily budget for in coming years, but these positions really potentially are. So at the end of this year, we have a literacy interventionist shared across elementary schools, and that sunsets with ESSER 2. So I would argue we want to locally fund that position. We have significant learning loss because on par with other places around the country, and it feels like an important time to really lean into this investment in interventionist. And whether we say it's a literacy interventionist, or it's a math interventionist, or it's a generalist interventionist at the elementary level, I don't think we can really afford this cut right now. We will, Nicole and I will come back with a data form proposal for our intervention staffing a little bit later in the year. But the proposal isn't going to suggest that we have one fewer interventionist. So I want you to see that coming. Our general educator at MUMS, last year, you wrote, I think it was 2 new positions into MUMS, and we grant funded 2, and that allowed us to go from 3 teams to 4. This position, we will need to write into our local budget if we want to retain 4 teams or have the option of 5. It's not, we can't cut that position. So that needs to be locally funded. The special educator also sunsets at the end of this year. I'll let Nicole speak to our special ed model. I would say it's not super clear yet if we need to locally fund that one or not. But these top 2 we really do. Yes, Lindsay.
When you're describing an interventionist, is the focus of that professional the students at the highest level of need only? Like I've been trying to learn more about this lately, and it seems at first glance like those positions really are for the kids who are testing at the highest level of need. And so my follow-up question would be, what about the rest of the students who might be showing a more gradual loss, but perhaps not reaching the level of need that would result in getting time and attention from an interventionist?
So let me answer generally, and then I'll let Nicole interrupt me at any point. So our interventionists, the concept behind that model is that for students who are identified by data, predominantly our math and literacy screening data, as needing more support, would receive services from an interventionist. They might be push-in services where the interventionist goes into the classroom, pull out, where they pull an individual or a small group out to receive services, but they are identified as needing additional services, additional instruction from a specialist. Once students receive that and we look at data to determine whether or not they continue to need that, if they're not responding to that level of support, then they actually are probably getting evaluated for more significant support. And so when you say the students at highest need, those are really predominantly served under IEPs. So they're tiered services. Nicole, what do you want to add or correct about that?
I think the only thing I would add is that with the new rule changes, interventionists can provide services to students on IEPs, which has never been the case before. So it's somewhat complicated in the sense that the idea of intervention is targeted, short-term, get the skill built, and then move on. And they also sometimes have the best skills for the kids on IEPs, and so they may also be served by them.
So this is really at the heart of the work that Nicole and I are doing this year to support the district in transitioning to Act 173. So we're meeting regularly on leadership teams to look at data and consider our systems, which will inform our proposals for staffing patterns in the years to come. Other questions on?
Well, I guess just to sort of summarize what you both were saying, it just sounds like an interventionist has potentially more responsibility in the district and can be utilized in more places to serve a broader range of students.
Certainly more flexibility to serve a broader range of students.
Gotcha.
Absolutely. More than ever before, and that started as of July 1st of this year.
Okay.
It's very new. We are learning our way into this new model, but it's a pretty exciting model to have a little more flexibility. Yeah, Lindsay.
You must have data available as to like what percentage of students are served by the interventionists, special educators, and some of these grant-funded positions?
We're actively building that data set now.
Great.
I have a question about the special educator. If the interventionist is seeing more students who may qualify for special ed services, we're not reducing special ed at all, right? Special educators? Because now we have an interventionist who's picking up some of that case?
The honest answer is we can't reduce them because we're having trouble hiring them. We don't have a plan to, we just let people know come work for us.
So the interventionist is kind of a stopgap to provide services to the kids who really need it.
So we have this year, in some cases, been unable to hire special educators, at least in one case, and reposted the position as an interventionist, and we're able to fill it that way. Because Act 173 allows us to have an interventionist serve students on IEPs, that works. And it sort of saved us. It muddies the conversation when we're looking at staffing and staffing levels and how many special educators and how many interventionists, when there can suddenly be more overlap between their jobs than ever before. We're in new territory, and Nicole and I were just looking up, finalizing this today, and the two of us were saying, okay, this is muddy, right? And it just is inherent to the moment we are in the policy shift. It's fuzzy and muddy, and we're learning our way into a new system. Other questions? Yes, Suzanne?
What's the educational background that you're looking for with the interventionists? I mean, like, are they teachers that are actually providing services?
Well, they are licensed as teachers, yes. Sometimes they have formal training in literacy or formal training in math or formal training in SEL, and I would say the state is working on more targeted credentialing for that. I think there is a license for literacy interventionists, isn't there?
We haven't been able to find one.
Okay, thank you. So, but they are at least teachers, and they either come to us with specialized training or we get them some training. Okay, I'm gonna move on. So these positions will sunset at the end of next year. So the classroom teacher, this was about reducing class size at Mary Hogan. It was in first grade this year. Our public plan says that it will be for 2 years, so there's no proposed change on that at this point. The prevention specialist, this is at Shoreham, I already mentioned, that's funded through next year. The other prevention specialist, theoretically funded through next year, we haven't been able to hire it yet, so that one is, we clearly wouldn't feel it as a hit in the budget right now, but does that mean that we don't want to fill the position? We're agnostic on that at this point. Part-time school counselor, same scenario. The two behaviors interventionists, again, the proposal is we retain them for 1 more year, and so this time next year we'll need to be thinking about that. The dean of culture and climate, same. The literacy interventionist, again, at the high school, this is a repeat, not yet hired, but theoretically funded through next year. The math interventionist is at the high school, is funded for 1 more year. So I just want you to see, these are less scary because we don't need to make decisions about them this year, but it's important to see that coming. 1 more of these slides. Yeah, Lindsay.
Prevention, like, what are we preventing? What is the, can you just?
Yeah, a prevention specialist tends to be a licensed clinical social worker. Those are providing social emotional supports and services to students with a range of needs. So for some kids, it can look like one-on-one clinical time. For other kids, it can look like small group social skills. It can look like supporting the principal and understanding the social emotional needs of students in the school.
The idea is to catch students who are manifesting challenging behaviors or having challenging experiences and to provide them with support to prevent risky behaviors or harder outcomes down the line. So pretty open-ended, but predominantly behavioral, mental health, social, emotional.
And is that at all tiers or is that targeted at specific tiers?
Tiers 2 and 3. Okay. And this was it was quasi-response to CSAC having difficulty retaining school-based clinicians. And we had an uneven allocation of school-based clinicians across the district. And so we were trying to shore ourselves up that way.
Mary?
Are these prevention specialists working with families as well?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, yes.
last one. Our preschool and early childhood transitions coordinator is funded through next year. Part of that position is about setting a vision for pre-K going forward. I would say we're a little stalled out on that right now. Hard to know how to set a vision for pre-K. It's currently in 2 buildings. We don't see a way to afford it across 7 buildings. So I think we could use some direction from leadership, and Peter can nod to where that, can point us to where that needs to come from, about how we should be imagining pre-K going forward. Our literacy coordinator, that will end at the end of next year. It's been an incredibly impactful position. It might be too soon to let it go. We'll be having that conversation next fall. Our part-time multilingual community, I missed a word there, liaison, that's the role that Fernanda Canales has retired into. That has been a highly impactful position for a really small and important subset of our community. It's been a joy having that addition to that part of our professional community and our outreach to families who speak limited English. And then this summer and after school programming, we're struggling with that one too, right? So what does it look like to fund and sustain summer and after school programming across 7 or 8 buildings? We haven't cracked that nut in the past, and we're not sure what to do with it now. We did post a position last summer to hire a coordinator to write grants and design a model for us, and sort of stalled out because we weren't sure we had the solid container to receive that person and give them the support that they needed to move the work forward. So that's another position. There's a bunch of money in that investment. We're sort of struggling to see our way forward with that. Peter, do you want to add anything about preschool or summer or after school?
Yeah, I mean, I think for summer and after school programming, our main hope was 21C grant, which is a 5-year grant. A number of our neighbors have that grant, and that's how they sustain after school. Given our demographic makeup, we don't really, and you have more specifics on this, that's probably not something we're going to get. We did go out for it once 5-6 years ago.
Second year here, yeah.
Yeah.
So they, 21C, I did attend the first of 2 trainings for that this fall, and got the impression that 2 of our schools might qualify. And they warn you ahead of time that writing a 21C grant, you should anticipate 50 to 100 professional hours. It wasn't 50 to 100 hours that I personally was able to give for 2 schools. I don't have that time. There are other grants that are available to us right now, but we really need probably need to hire somebody to take the lead to research the grants and opportunities and see a way forward for us.
Yeah, I think looking at whether we are where we will be with pre-K, whether we look at other models is something that I think we're in some ways kind of continually looking at, and then realizing that financially it's a pretty significant investment that will most likely put pressure on other parts of our budget that we'll have to unfund long term. We currently, as Caitlin said, have two programs essentially, or one program with 2 locations. A lot of the work that this coordinator has done has been really, really helpful, has been to really tie those 2 locations together. We unified a long time ago, but we still have stayed in a lot of ways. We're still very much the way we were 6 years ago. Just kind of how things work as cultures grow in an individual school. So that has been really helpful to work towards like a one solid program in 2 locations, and having some flexibility in terms of access from other towns too. So those aren't really town specific per se. They're becoming more of ACSD programs as opposed to, this school has a program, this school doesn't.
Yeah, I want to echo that, Meg Baker, as our preschool and early childhood transitions coordinator, has done quite a lot to lead the work to increase equity across those 2 buildings so that we have a common design across the 2 programs. Some pretty significant and exciting changes. Keeping 2 preschool programs alive is a hard scale We have a lot of leaders, because it's principals and central office leaders and a coordinator, plus each classroom has its own director, because the director has to be on site. It's a lot of leaders in the mix for a very small program. So that's a complicated scale that we're working at. I would argue not sustainable, but we're doing it now. But also, you know, Meg was showing me last week or the week before the numbers of students enrolled in pre-K is down significantly from before the pandemic, but also she was saying there are virtually no open slots. So not only has enrollment declined, but capacity has declined. We closed our pre-K programs, and then I think 2 of our private program partners also closed in the recent years. So there are fewer slots in our community now than there were before. So this is not a problem that's getting better over time. Yeah, Mary.
There's a statewide campaign called Child Care Campaign under the direction of Let's Grow Kids. And their hope is that by 2025, the legislature helps to fund more childcare centers as well as staff, et cetera. So is anybody involved in that? Is Meg helping with any of that?
I don't know about that specifically, but Meg keeps us very much in the loop. If she's tracking, she would be, if she were standing here, she would be able to answer your question.
Yeah, because it sounds like they really have a lot of energy behind this, and they're hoping that with this really concerted campaign, if we contact our legislators and our senators and really push this, that it may get funded.
It is a field that begs for a flooding of funding. Absolutely.
Definitely.
Okay, I think that's all I've got. Boy, that wasn't short, sorry. You've got 2 more of those.
Not even the third.
So, that was the really concrete, clear, you kind of know what's going on presentations. I'm going to invite you into the muddy waters of special education reform. I will do my best to answer any questions. So reminders and impacts. My hope is a lot of this isn't new information, but it's okay if it feels new. So, underneath there, it says, big picture, Act 173. So I just thought I'd start by reminding all of us why the state is making the changes it's making. So Act 173 is designed to focus our attention on important questions. How do we support kids at the earliest time possible? Meaning, how do we make it so we don't have to wait for kids to fail to get help? Act 173 essentially points us to build systems to establish prevention and intervention as the instructional focus. Another question, how do we build more inclusive learning environments? Act 173 is vigorously pointing us towards reimagining how we teach, creating more universal design for learning, more classroom interventions, and more differentiated instruction. What are we funding and why? Act 173 points us toward prioritizing the use of our funding with the greatest efficiency and efficacy. And is definitely pointing us towards making fiscal decisions that align with the actual act. So that's like the 50,000-foot view. Any questions about that? Hopefully it feels familiar. Thank you for tolerating, I have a lozenge. So reminder number 1 is this is a huge spreadsheet from the state, and I'm basically pointing you to remember that the way funding is changing is there'll be a uniform base amount times our recent costs. That's how they're gonna determine how much money we get in the block grant versus reimbursing us. For us, we think our funding is gonna be reduced. This is the really muddy part. We find out each year how much we get based on a complicated formula. We think it's gonna go down. Does that sound familiar? Mm-hmm. Okay, good. Reminder 2 is that at the same time as we think our funding is gonna be reduced, our obligation will likely increase. So Vermont has had more stringent regulations for special education than federal regulations warranted. So we made it harder to receive special education services in the state of Vermont than in almost everywhere else in the United States. For any of you who have lived in other states, moving to Vermont can be surprising when it comes to special education. So that dynamic under Act 173 has either already changed as of July 1st, 2022, or it's getting set to. So starting next July, adverse effect, which is how you determine whether or not a student qualifies for special education, will no longer be numerically determined. It will be based on need, not the 15th percentile. If I'm speaking Greek to you, it just means that right now we measure kids, and if they're not below the 15th percentile in their academic performance, they don't get special education. That's going away. Secondly, functional skills will be covered without being tied to academic achievement, meaning kids can receive special education services for behavior, social emotional needs, or community skills, regardless of their academic performance. So right now to qualify, you have to have the 15th percentile plus that need. That 15th percentile will go away. Keep going?
Yes.
Thirdly, service providers, as of now, are anyone with the right skill. This is what Caitlin was speaking about before, not just special education staff. So Vermont has been the rare exception where you only get special education services from class, special educator. That has changed. We no longer ask the question, who's the special educator? Instead, we ask, what's the skill that the student needs and who has the best ability to teach that skill? That's a game changer in a really muddy way. There's one exception. Specific learning disability, which currently 33% of the students in ACSD qualify under, they will be impacted differently and it will actually become more difficult for them to qualify. I'm happy to, anybody who wants to dig into that, I'm happy to explain. I'm not going to dig into it right now because it'll detract from the gestalt of the presentation. Any questions about this?
No, but it's not a question, it's a comment from what you had spoken of in the past. And there were some questions I remember from the board on that. What that last thing that says service providers, some of that is going to be the classroom teacher who's going to assume that role with that specific student.
It can be, doesn't mean it's going to be, but it can be.
Which may be an issue. I'm only making that comment because that was the comment before reading that third book. So.
Yes, in Vermont, this is one of the biggest game changers, which is why it's in the presentation, is to remind us all that IEP teams will be considering who in the school has the best skills to provide for a student. Okay, okay. The slideshow really wants to stay here. Keep going. Would you mind moving your head? Thank you. Let's see. So the impact of this over time. So these changes have been designed to start July 1st, 2022, and they really unfold, some of them unfold over time. The reminder one about the changing in funding with the new calculation. For us, we think it means state funding will eventually go down. Plus, special education eligibility being relaxed, what we just talked about, how there will be more students who are eligible for special education. For ACSD, we think we're going to see an increased rate. So we think funding will go down and the ability to provide services will go up. And then that's going to equal a reshaping of how we provide services and personnel, which it shouldn't be a surprise because that's what Act 173 is designed to do. It is designed to sort of force might be the right word, into making significant changes in what we do. possibly less money, greater eligibility, or another way to say it, it is a legal obligation. Essentially leads to figuring out how we change what we do for kids, how we provide services. Yeah.
Nicole, when you say that you expect to get less funding, ACSD does, is that going to be true for other school districts too?
Some school districts will get more.
Okay, what's kind of driving us to get a lower?
At one point I had it in the slideshow, then I took it out. There's a complicated formula that the state engages in that looks at the average of spending over the past 3 years times your ADM, which gives you a block grant amount. Why will it go down? Because the uniform base amount, which is a sum, I don't know if I even know what it is. Do you know what the uniform base amount is?
I think it's just that's like they just said it.
Yeah, they set some rate that when you multiply it toward times our average, causes us to have less money.
So it's
Yeah.
less than our average. I mean, it's the amount that they're gonna give us is less than we've been spending, basically.
Pretty much. Yes, Steve?
The other reason may be that when we get it as a block grant, we get it up front, and that's all the money we have to spend. If we get someone that comes in, either qualifies for services in the district or comes into the district needing services, we don't get any additional money.
That's a great
We
way
have to
explain
foot all of that, and that can be extremely expensive.
it. That's a great way to explain it. In the past, so last year, and all the years before that, we would be reimbursed.
Right.
And so our budget could grow with our need. The idea is that if we do the other things, there'll be less need for special education. That's sort of the largest philosophical idea behind all of this, is that if we have more prevention and intervention, kids won't need as much special education. Caitlin?
And to that point, in areas like literacy and math in particular, really strengthening our tier 1 practices is a preventative measure. So that idea of not just classroom by classroom strengthening our practices, but in a coordinated way saying, this is how we teach phonics, this is how we teach phonemic awareness, this is the scope and sequence. It's really easy to see where students are falling behind on that path and to intervene quickly when it's highly affordable, right? So that these investments in tier 1 literacy and math are a part of the Act 173, sort of laying the groundwork to make all of this more affordable over time. But it's big systems change. It'll take us time to get there.
Lindsay?
So, as far as funding being tied to an individual and their needs, say somebody who has really significant, like 2 to 1 type of need, they change school districts, the money doesn't follow them?
I'm glad you asked that question. Under Act 173, the number that's published for next year is 63,000 is the cap, and anything above 63,000 gets that amount above the 63,000 gets reimbursed at 95%.
So that's their way of allowing the money to follow the need and be tied to a student who has already, the assessments have been done. They know what,
Yeah, if there's a student who the services cost $200,000, ACSD pays out of its budget 63, and then that difference, the state will pay 95%.
That's for 1 year. Is that what you said?
Yeah.
And then subsequent years?
No, every year that
Oh,
student.
all right.
Yeah.
And right now, so that's how it will be.
Right now
Right
it's
now-
50, no, it's 61.
Okay, so that's changing, and is it still 90, so as of now, is it 95 or 100%?
It's 95.
Like, what's the deal with that 5%, like they just,
I don't know.
that's
How it's-
strange.
For the legislature.
Yeah, that's how they.
That's
how
so
they-
random, like, to me.
Well, Peter's online, you can probably ask.
There's
Peter.
probably a reason for it. It's higher than it was. So if I'm gonna guess what the legislature was thinking was, we're making all these changes that are impacting funding, but we recognize that there are children whose services cost in excess of $63,000. And so we're gonna try and pay 95% of that, which is more than we've ever paid. I think it was 60% 5 years ago.
Is the age range changing at all? Will students be able to prolong their, is that anything gonna change? Will they have to graduate sooner, or they can stay until, what is it, 22?
Students can qualify for services up until age 22 based on IEP team decision making.
And that's not changing?
It's not
Okay.
In the law. I just have one more comment, because we're looking at class size as one of our policies. Seems to me we really have to be very diligent about making sure the class size does not become so skewed that the teacher can't provide the additional services. So we have to be mindful of what we're asking teachers to do.
Yeah, I think that, yes, there are many considerations.
Yeah.
Yes. So, as we've been talking about in central office, one of the things I find myself explaining and that we thought would be helpful is if we have less funding from the state and a greater obligation for services, we're gonna need to make changes in how we staff, which is what we're talking about now. We're gonna have to talk about service delivery, roles, schedules, and systems will have to change. These are vague, muddy things. Remember at the beginning I said, this is the muddy part. I'm not standing up here with answers, I'm just naming as I sort of think about, and Peter, Caitlin, and I talk about it, and we talk with leaders and teachers. These are the things that we talk about. Who does what when will likely change based on the skill of the teacher. So evidence-based practices are gonna need to grow. We're gonna need more database decision-making about staffing and services. We're gonna need robust data collection and analysis to make sure that we're effective. And we're gonna need to continue building our MTSS, all of which we've already just talked about. We're gonna need more effective interventions so that we can figure out how to get to kids as soon as possible. All of this is already underway. So this, I don't know how you all feel in your bodies, this can be slightly anxiety provoking. So I just want to point out that I need help with the slides. Thank you. That we're already working on this. To the next one, like the whole other next slide. So we just named all these things in this room. There's nothing on my slide that we haven't talked about. There's gonna be difficult decisions on staffing, difficult decisions about job responsibilities, and difficult decisions using data. So what are we already doing? We're already collecting more data than we have ever collected as a district. It's beautiful. Caitlin, how beautiful is the data?
It's so beautiful.
It's color coded. We're talking about it with leaders and teachers. It's beautiful. So we're collecting a lot of data so that decisions are not spaghetti on the wall, but they're tied to what's actually happening in schools. We're already having staffing flexibility for services where we can. So we're already seeing what's it like when a special education student needs a particular skill set and it's actually an interventionist who has the best training to serve that child. We're already designing towards increased focus on targeted interventions with a medium size. It's I think 40 to 45 teachers and staff that Caitlin and I meet with 6 times this year to design a system so that we have better interventions for kids. We're already focusing on universal design for learning at the classroom level with our IB collaborative teams. These are all the things underway. We're educating the system about the state system changes, so we're trying to talk about it as much as possible so there are no surprises and hopefully collective ideas and wisdom can come to the surface. And we're integrating our systems, our data, and our practices into what we're calling problem-solving teams, not with the idea that kids are a problem. Kids are never a problem,
but systems and practices can be. They can be a problem, they can get in the way of helping kids, and so this year, we're meeting in problem-solving teams to talk about what we do and how we do it, and what we can do better. I think that's it. Questions? Or comments?
Sounds like a lot of work.
It is a lot of work.
Yes.
What kind of feedback have you got from the association? Because it seems like it's a very base thing that you're asking teachers to do, that seems to be above and beyond unless there's something that you're asking them not to do anymore.
Well, so I can speak I would say that we haven't gotten a lot of significant feedback from the association. Our approach has been to include teachers in the conversation and the work as much as possible. We're certainly receptive to feedback if it comes our way. When it says that we're focusing on teacher learning on UDL, we're taking the same structures of time that we used to build our IB curriculum. And what we're doing in that time is shifting the focus to say the curriculum is built. How do we reflect on our work using the same time that we had before? How do we reflect on our work through the lens of increasing access and success for students? So we're fortunate that we have a fairly well-developed curriculum because of all of the work that we did to build IB together and the structures that we created to make more collaborative time happen through that process are now being redistributed to make this happen. Nicole was talking about the 6 times that we're meeting this year with this team of interventionists, coordinators, principals, the 2 of us, and a few other key players. We're not adding that onto people's schedules. We're carving it out of time that's already been set aside for professional development. So what we're trying to do is use the time that teachers were already dedicating to professional learning, collaboration, faculty meetings, and redeploy that time to this end. So our these data-driven meetings that we're doing aren't new meetings, they're repurposed leadership meetings. So we used to meet twice a month with principals and coordinators at the elementary level and twice a month at the secondary level. Now, one of each of those meetings at each level is focused on this explicitly. So it is a huge project, it's not small, and I don't want to diminish that. But we are really trying to do our best to fit it into the structures that already exist so that it's not more work, it's just a refocusing on how we do our work together.
Yeah, I guess, I appreciate the acknowledgement that the sort of work that was done at the district level for all the IB work with creating a coordinated curriculum across all the schools and making sure, it's a continuous curriculum and that this system that has been developed is serving this work. I think that's great. I think the thing that I'm most concerned about is in the classroom, when you have teachers who are dealing with students who have a greater need and making sure that there's a place for those students to go when that need arises. And the teacher, it's beyond the skill or the ability of that teacher in that moment because of the volume of student need in that classroom. And I think that's what we're all really uncomfortable about and wondering how that's gonna look in real time, so.
Thank you, yes.
Well, that's a real problem. And not only that we have more need, but we also have significant gaps in our staffing because of positions that we haven't been able to fill, especially in terms of paraprofessionals.
Yeah, so it's scary.
So that you're naming something that is real. Ideally, the hope is that these are systems that address student need earlier as the need is beginning to emerge, so it escalates less. Right? So I think that the unsatisfying answer is that we're doing the work that we need to do to meet the moment that we're in, and people are rolling their sleeves up and working hard. Nicole, did you want to say anything differently about that?
I think that you are naming a real, something we have to figure out.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, so just listening to this and having been in the classroom last year, right? And I would encourage that we have a way for, because when teachers are stressed out, they're working hard, they may not have time necessarily or the wherewithal to say, hey, Nicole, hey, Caitlin, we're in trouble. And then next thing we know, they're maybe walking out the door. So somehow we need to be able to have a way to get ahead of that and give them the support they need, because I'm really concerned, especially with the shortages in staff. I just see it as kind of like the perfect storm. Yeah, with the right staff, this is great, but without the right staff, it may not be so great, and I'm kind of worried.
Yes.
As you are.
Yes, and what you're naming is an essential component of this.
Yeah.
Hearing what teachers are experiencing.
Yeah, they
seeing
gotta
what they're
feel
experiencing.
comfortable, and, cause sometimes you think it's you that's a failure, cause there's so many dynamics here, and just have it so easy to be able to share or to even anticipate. It's almost like having to anticipate that somebody's kind of stressed out and going to them.
I would say some of the biggest stressors in our system right now are a lack of substitutes. So teachers are frequently being asked to give up
Absolutely.
planning time in order to sub. They're compensated for that, which is, I suppose, technically fair. It doesn't mean that it's not a drain on their time and their energy. And so a lack of substitutes is an enormous problem.
Yeah.
The more that you can encourage people to apply to be subs, we shower you with gratitude. Those applications are in our school newsletters and they're cycling through very consistently. The same is true for paraprofessionals, lacking paraprofessionals. And again, we've made an important decision to meet our legal obligations to assign one-on-one and intensive need paraprofessionals where we're legally obligated to provide them first. It means we have far fewer classroom paraprofessionals than we've ever had before. Our teachers they do feel that difference. And so again, that posting for paraprofessionals is in those newsletters, and we encourage you to continue to spread that around. And another position is custodians. And I don't know that our teachers are feeling it quite the same way, but many people in our system are feeling, our custodians in particular are feeling it as they cover for one another. And we have many people picking up a vacuum and picking up a mop and filling in because we just have so much less support staff than we've had in the past. So that doesn't totally answer, but I think that if we can get some of those positions filled, it is a significant relief salve for the professionals who are still our colleagues in this system.
Anything else? Thank you for being in it with us.
So now we have the fastest budget presentation ever, so we can get on.
I just don't know where this came from. This is not the information that was provided. I was not expecting that 45 minutes.
So we have the Great Cliffs of ESSER coming, muddy, shifting forces of Act 173. Get into the other budget drivers for this coming year, which are all a little bit more tangible, a little bit meatier, but they're driving it, so there we go. The first one I wanted to talk about today was facilities. It's quite a landscape that we're in right now. We've seen all construction costs rise 85 to 100% over the last 12 months. As a real-time example of that, the high school kitchen project was quoted, I think, last week at $4 million, up from $2 million, which was less than 12 months ago. So that's kind of a sign of the times there. That's going to have a really big impact on what projects we're able to undertake facilities-wise and where we're going to have to hold. So, we're seeing inflation and workforce shortages have a huge effect on materials. light and heavy equipment and subcontractor pricing. So that might be things that are in addition to the major construction projects that we're seeing with regards to just regular maintenance of our buildings. So, you know, in the case of the kitchen project, we're looking at how we pare down the scope of what work we're going to be able to do, and that's going to be kind of the real nature of the situation on the ground for the indefinite future there. I call this a risk center for budget because it's really, really hard to hit a moving target. And right now, with this kind of fluctuation, it's going to be super difficult to put a budget together that's going to give us an accurate depiction of what that spend is going to be. So we're paying extra attention to it, but it's also something that's volatile and should be under close scrutiny. Any facilities questions? Tech and IT is the next one. Had a good meeting with Bill, and we've got a pretty good idea of what's going on. Individual tech devices, we're using Chromebooks, have become a fundamental part of each student's curricular needs. We're currently at around a 1 device per person ratio throughout the ACSD. What we're also seeing is that IT is a growing field, so we've got aging servers that will be moving to a cloud-based system because everything is kind of trending in that direction. We've got an ever-evolving landscape of cybersecurity needs. Phone lines might be phased out in favor of voice over IT, and several more things going on there. What that's telling us is we've got a budget for rolling device replacement around a 5-year life expectancy. That's the best you can do with a Chromebook, and sometimes they don't even make it to a year. So building into the budget, the idea that every year we're going to replace 1/5 of those devices is going to be a significant increase into the IT budget moving forward. We're also thinking of IT as something that's a little bit of an evolution in progress, and as different changes to the landscape occur with regards to how we use servers and what security looks like, we can expect to need to be a little bit more flexible than usual in that regard. Any questions on that?
It's all happy, isn't it?
Yeah.
I know.
This is a tough one to get out of.
On the transportation front, we're heading into the last year of our busing contract with Betcha. This is a 5-year contract. They were the only bidder, so we were kind of pushed in that direction 5 years ago when we went with Betcha. I believe it was a 40% increase. I wasn't here then, but 40% increase over our previous contract, and this is pre-COVID. So transportation costs are on the rise. Again, we got a break in 24 because we're in our last year, but we're working with both of the other districts in the county to kind of combine forces and see if we can put together a critical mass that might make us more attractive to other regional providers so that we can bring some more competitive bidding to the table and hopefully control pricing that way. There's a moonshot idea of putting a countywide school-owned busing company together, and we're discussing that as sort of, if not now, then maybe sometime in the future, way to bring things in-house. Obviously, you inherit the headache of the labor shortages that are affecting all the other industries that we're talking about. And, Betcha's doing their best to give us drivers where we need them, but it's extremely hard to find subs, whether it's as a custodian, a bus driver, a para, a substitute teacher, or somebody in food service. Food service. So food service is kind of rolling along with the same market volatility as facilities. So, ingredients that cost $50 last year are $100 now, and that's pretty normal across the board to see those twofold increases on certain food items. Because we switched to a centralized food system. We don't have a current food service budget as a line item. We do have enough historical data this year that we're gonna put it in as a budgeted line item so that we can pay more attention to how we spend money and track it a little bit. Again, it's another one of those risk centers that's really hard to predict where we're gonna be within 12 to 16 months. But we'll keep an eye on it because of that. And yeah, like I said, it'll be part of the budget presentation moving forward so that we'll have an idea of what we're looking to spend. And inflation is the last one.
There's
So
good news.
the other name for this slide is why can't flat be flat, but we're kind of surfing an inflation wave here. Individual school needs, we talked about a lot of the personnel part of it, and so keep that in the back of your mind, but the carryover budgets from each of the individual schools remain fairly consistent from this year to next. Many of those non-personnel line items are going to be subject to cresting inflation rates. So here's a little bit of a forecast looking from now all the way through the second quarter of next year. So we're going to see a drop, but we're also going to see a little bit of a peak. In order to be honest in our budgeting of those items, we're going to need to look at 5 to 6% kind of blanket increase across the board. That'll be more granular than just tacking on 5 or 6% to every non-personnel line item, but I think the overall trend across the budget is going to be something in this neck of the woods as far as what everything costs right now and next year. And the last bit that is, oh, I guess that slide didn't make it, but I did just want to mention that we are in the last year of our non-teacher union contract, and that the negotiations committee is underway and strategizing there, but it won't affect this next year's budget, but on the horizon is the need for a new support staff contract. And given the landscape that we're in regarding labor and supply of labor, it's going to be something that's a budget driver moving forward. That was fast, but
They're stuck in my mud.
Any questions on any of that? Great. I'm sure we'll be having many more detailed conversations about it in the next weeks and months here. End of October and November is a big budgeting month, so we'll keep you guys posted as those things unfold, and look forward to talking to you again about that.
Thank you.
We did have a finance committee meeting. We did attach the 2 documents we did with the finance committee just for the board's information. The timeline.
One comment, the timeline is basically the same as it's been other years for board members to, just been here other years. Nothing's changed there.
All right, you good?
Yep.
All right. Moving on. So our next discussion was around board stipends. I think we're not going to dive too deep into this right now. I think we'll just, I'll make comment about it, which is that several board members have mentioned over the last year or so that other districts have increased board stipends. In this district, voters approved an increase at Hannaford. And so there's sort of question about if we raise a board stipend, does that encourage more people to run to be on the board? I think it's something that we need to all think about, consider, and we will bring it back onto an agenda either next meeting or weekend after that, or meeting after that. But just wanted to put it out there so that people are thinking about how they feel about it.
Just a quick question, when does the board receive the stipend? Is that next year or this year or?
Each year, what time?
October, November.
I think it's when you file your
I'm
paperwork.
not positive when that is sent out.
On the MOU, it says.
You would know probably better than I.
It's like around now,
It's
yeah.
around now.
It's like around now. So anybody that has been a board member this year should be getting one around this time of year. But this, what
So
she's
it's
talking about would be
currently-
to increase it moving
Right,
forward. That
right,
wouldn't impact
right.
us.
Right, so what it would be, the reason why we're bringing it up now is as we talk about budget for next year.
Mm.
So it's currently $500 annually. And so everybody should think about how they feel about moving it, and we'll bring it.
Well, just for perspective,
Yep.
we actually voted to increase it a few years ago because we felt like nobody was running for it. What was it before? Was it like 200 or something when we first started? Do you remember?
I
I
don't
don't
remember.
think
I
it's
don't
that
think,
low.
I think it was the first year.
Years ago, it was 0.
We
did go
voted
from
to give
0 to
ourselves
something.
500, and that was even controversial. We felt bad voting to
When we
give
unified
ourselves.
6 years ago, we went to $500.
Oh, was that
right,
first
it was
year
for
maybe?
unification, it was the first year unification. that's
You
what it
have to put it out.
And I think we didn't get anything the first year, and then we voted to get 500 as of that, after that first year, so that those of us that stayed on for the second year got it. Okay, that's what it was.
Okay, so just keep that in back of mind and we'll discuss it at a future meeting. All right, so brings us to ad hoc committee findings. First off, I want to thank Steve and Barb and Mary Heather and Joanna and Suzanne for putting in the extra time to assemble the materials that we have in front of us tonight. As a refresher for those just tuning in, the board created an ad hoc committee and asked it to gather information and share it back with us and how other districts have dealt with school closure in their articles of agreement. So what we have before us is the product of that group's work. What I'd like to do in this section of the meeting is this. I'll have Suzanne start off and sort of walk us through the ad hoc committee's work. And then we'll open it up to questions from the full board, sort of clarifying questions for that committee. And then I think the best way to do it will be to go around so that everybody has equal time to share their opinion about, one, whether or not we should amend this part of the Articles of Agreement. And two, if we are interested in amending it generally, I want you to think as we're talking, who would you want to have the authority to make closure decisions? So is it the board plus the district, board plus town, board only, or some other combination? So basically, as you look at it, do we want to be a green town, an orange town, or a red town? So when we get through that, I'd like to take a vote as to whether the majority of the board wants to amend the articles. If the majority does not, then we're done. If the majority wishes to, then we'll discuss sort of in which way, as I said, are we going red, orange, or green? Who should have the authority to close the school? And then, so by the end of the meeting, I'd like to have made those decisions, whether or not we are interested in changing it and in what direction we'd like the closure piece to look like. And then we will work out the sort of language and the nuances or the requirements around that if we choose to change at a future meeting. I don't think we have the capacity tonight to go through everything. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to
We even
Steve.
have the brain capacity to go through all those things.
Feel free to stand up and stretch or anything as we're moving along.
It'll be like 10 o'clock when we get out of here is what you're saying.
I hope not.
If we're
Okay.
lucky.
I mean,
Yeah,
the football
okay.
game on, I like to watch.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm a Patriots fan.
I do.
So, again, I'd like to thank the committee. We had many meetings and we did not always see eye to eye. As
we reported at one of our last meetings, it was mentioned that, we had a conversation around, should we add into our work around, board makeup, but that was not what our task was. Our task was specifically to look at charter language around school closure, and we worked very hard to stick very close to what was asked of us. So I don't want to make the night really, really long. You were all given our findings of 15 some odd pages, as well as a 2-page piece up front that was findings of the ad hoc board committee. And we broke it down into categories, some just overall general information about all of the districts that we have included here and or not included. Where it says layer, I'll start right now with layers of requirements. Everyone has at least one, because by Vermont state statute, it is the fiscal responsibility of school boards to close.
That's the default, so that would be
Well,
zero.
that's the default.
Yeah.
So that's, if you have nothing else, you go by that. And then from there on, then people have added on other pieces, whether it be a town vote, a district vote, multiple votes over years, percentage, majority, and things like that. So we color coded it. That was just our way of kind of breaking it out by the layers. We also had talked about possibly like giving one example from each of the layers. But then we decided, some people might see that as we're leading people to an answer or to a decision. So we just gave you everything that we have. Steve has sent it on to the State Department, the AOE, and they've looked at it, and they said they did come up and tell us, well, you have one school listed here twice. Whoops, we fixed that one. And then they said, looks really good, very in-depth, more so than what they had originally sent us, so we got kudos for that. But I'm due to the fact that it's 8 minutes of 9, I'm not going to say any more, so if people have questions, anybody in the committee may help answer any of the questions, but we'll leave it at that. Thank you. Does anyone have questions for the committee? Mary, sorry.
Okay, I'm a little confused because you have the 3 categories, which should make sense, but the green is, it's a board decision. The yellow is its district and board decision.
Mm-hmm.
By district, do you mean just the administration?
No, the electorate of the district.
The electorate, okay. So how is that different than red when it's town and board
So it's
decision?
just
Because
the
it's
electorate.
just the town of the impacted school.
Oh, just the town
Just
of
the
the
town.
impacted school, okay, all right, that makes sense, thank you.
Okay, so it would be like, I'll use Bridgeport as an example. So say,
Yeah.
and this has not been discussed, this is
Yeah,
This is
okay.
just hypothetical, and I'm only saying it because I live in Bridgeport. So if we were to close Bridgeport, and if it was in the category 3, the red,
Right,
then Bridgeport would vote and they would have to approve it.
okay,
But we wouldn't have to send it to the entire district
okay,
to approve to close. Does that make sense?
yep, now I get it.
Okay. And again, we've not discussed Bridgeport. Bridgeport was
Yeah.
We've not discussed any school.
Right, it was just,
Okay,
it could be Timbuktu school for that matter. Any other questions, if anybody can think at this late hour with all this data that's 15
I had
pages
one
worth?
question as I was thinking, you guys have now, are the official experts, and was there any moment where you thought, why did nobody think of X? Like, it just seems like there was a missing, was there anything, have you had that, or do you feel like the options are well represented here?
I don't think any of us ever said, hey, there's something missing. I think we all said,
there are so many of them that are very similar to each other that, you know, at one point we were like, so who borrowed each other's writing,
Yeah.
you know? And, as we look at it, we have found that the AOE does not keep track of language for school closures. So as things change, they aren't tracking it. So that added another level.
Yes.
Steve?
Well, they do not, in fact, the Agency of Education does not have, they are not the keeper of record of any of these charters. Therefore, the state, if you want to put it this way, doesn't really know what the final charters are. Those are on file with the town clerks. And the only reason that our job wasn't to contact every single city was because in order to pass in a district, the language had to be exactly the same. Therefore, we were able to cut it down to the number of school districts. But the Agency of Education does not and is not responsible for keeping track of this information.
One question regarding, there were a number of them that had time frames that after 2 to 4 or 3 years or whatever, there wasn't the same rule that occurred before that. It was a little hard to know where a lot of these districts fall into that, because not all of them started 3 years ago or 4 years ago. Was there a sense that many of those timeframes have sunsetted, so to speak?
Yes.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah, if you look at the top of the second page.
Yeah.
The what?
Top of the second page.
Says 20
20
districts.
districts
Sorry.
only required town votes within the 2 to 4 year options. These temporary protections have all sunset.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Okay. And I mean,
I read it all, but I missed it.
that's okay. And
Right.
if you follow the Mount Abe Addison Northwest piece that's going on in their school closure piece that they're proposing, they do have a kind of a sunset piece within that. So that, again, as school districts do their thing, some of these might be current today, and next year they may no longer be current. Jamie,
So does that mean then that 20 districts,
where are you?
I'm on where you are.
Second page.
Okay.
I'm still on page 2, we got a long way to go. Does that mean that 20 districts had for 2 to 4 years, and then 18 still have?
That means, what it means is 39,
The bullet above.
the bullet above,
Right, okay,
39
right.
have town vote requirements. Of those, 20 districts had them and have now gone away.
Or will go.
Or we'll go.
And then 18 districts still have them. And then there's one that requires a town vote, but it's not binding.
Okay.
Okay, so if you want just a simple view of it, 18 districts currently have a binding town vote requirement in order for,
19. 18 plus 1.
the one is non-binding.
Oh, that's the non-binding. I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
that's
That's
the
not binding. Okay,
non-binding.
never mind.
Okay.
Yeah.
So is this of the option, of the various 3 options, or the 3 options, is 18 the majority of, not the majority, or what is the right?
So if you look at the highlighted on page 1, you'll see the green highlight in under decision-making authority.
Okay, there's 15.
15 of the 46 unified districts that operate schools. The decision to close a school is a board-only decision.
Right,
The next bullet down,
okay,
12 of those 46, the decision to close a school requires both a board vote and a district-wide vote
right,
of the electorate. And then next down, the highlighted red, 18 districts
okay,
require a town vote as well as a board vote. So those are sort of the 3 buckets. And then if you go
Right.
down one more bullet, it's kind of highlighted in orange. That's because it's kind of this weird amalgam of requiring both, and it's a very specific, their requirements are very specific.
this is the Windsor.
Yes.
The Windsor one, and actually, we talked about it, and Windsor almost falls into policy and procedure.
Yeah.
All rolled into one, which is, makes it.
Yeah, the article is
makes
very
it really
structured.
weird.
Like if then
And then, yes,
this.
then, you know,
Yeah.
as you're trying to figure out like how this would happen. Peter Conlon.
Thanks. I was wondering if you found any language or discussed any language about sort of contingencies, like, follows one path unless it's an immediate health or safety issue, or if the population of a school is below a certain level, or you can't staff it appropriately.
No,
There were
only
only
Windsor
two, yeah.
really has anything like that, and I mean, Windsor, talks about thresholds defined in their campus sustainability policy. Includes a per pupil cost of 120%, and then it goes on to say, subsequent recommendation for closure has been made by the superintendent in the annual report. Cases where per pupil cost has exceeded 130% at the campus in question over 3 years.
Right.
And it fluctuates back and forth. So that was really the only one that kind of did that if then data type of thing.
Yeah, I will say Wyndham Southeast, which is the last red one listed, does have a requirement about a year-long study to determine the student impact, and it's much more structured, like.
But it doesn't have those
But it
percentages.
doesn't have,
Right.
it doesn't have like triggers, for example, for school closure or criteria.
And there was some discussion on the committee that although we would not make a recommendation as to what to do about it, that the conditions or the bars that would be used to close a school really is tied up in this. We are talking about how to close a school. None of these talk about why to close a school.
Right.
And it really is important that the board, this is why it didn't come out of the committee, was because the board thought that was a decision of the whole board, or the committee thought it was a decision of the whole board. And really, that opens up another much larger can of worms.
Right.
So,
Yeah, and we talked about that would probably be more like procedure
yes.
piece to go along with your policy, your charter language, which we weren't asked to do. We were asked strictly to find the language that's out there for different places in their process of closing schools, should they choose to go that route. So we stuck very closely to what we were asked. And so hence, that's why we also did not bring to you a 1, 2, and 3 out of all of these article language excerpts, because we didn't want to have anybody say, well, the ad hoc committee, basically told you what to do. We wanted you all to come to your own conclusions.
Great, thank you.
I wanted to address some, you had asked the question, like, did we find anything that might have been missing? And one thing that, and I appreciated Suzanne talking about this earlier, that one thing I found missing in the process was the context of looking at the articles in conjunction with how the dynamic of another article might have affected the reason why a district chose to do an affected town vote versus an entire electorate. So that context, I think, was a little bit missing. That's my personal, and that's where we had it. And I appreciate you saying that there was a disagreement. And then I also feel like there was language that wasn't centered around school closure provision that is good language to look at. Namely, one that comes up in the Windsor Southeast about local advisory groups, they call it leadership councils, that I thought was good language too, but because it didn't fall in exactly school closure, we couldn't necessarily discuss it or bring it up at the board level. So
Yeah, I guess
don't
my
know if there's
question was
permission.
more, was there anything missing in terms of school closure language or school closure ideas? But thank you.
Barb?
Yeah, and earlier, we kind of talked about how some of them were so similar. And one of the reasons for that is during the process, maybe not early on when we all started our discussion, because I think we were the third one that consolidated. The AOE came up with a template, and it was based on kind of concerns that rural communities had on the consolidation to address, some of those concerns. So that's why you see a lot of the similar language and really some protections in there for consistently across many schools. It's really I think people adopting the AOE template.
So can you just elaborate on that, Barb? Which ones are you
Well, the whole
saying?
provision, the whole provision about being, even that, 2 to 4 years, you can't do anything within that time period, that all came from the AOE template. As well as, a district-wide vote to close the school.
Right, yeah, I
or-
think most of the yellow ones were
Yeah,
an AOE.
yeah, and that's why the language is very much
Yeah.
almost identical in some cases with a few little minor tweaks.
Yeah.
It's funny because my remembrance of it was beyond a template, that it was official, I'm not sure I would say a mandate, but I as I've gone back and I've looked at Act 46 language, and my recollection of it was that there was that kind of
It was a push.
it felt like more than a push. It felt like there was, and I haven't researched it or talked to the AOE about it, but yeah.
Yeah, that's only what I saw written on
Yeah, I mean,
their website.
there were 11 districts that were forced mergers, and
Yes.
most of those mergers did have that template language. There were a few, I think one at least who has since changed, and then I think another one that had a little addition
Right.
besides the template language, but most of them had that.
Okay, so at this point, does anyone have any further questions for the committee in terms of clarifying questions?
I just wanted to make one observation.
Yes,
Based on the context that Peter Burrows made, no district has changed its charter around closures. They've not added anything or changed any of the articles except the two that you mentioned. So no one has dropped or added a clause or as far as we know. So.
Lindsay?
As far as we know, are any other districts considering it? Are we the only district considering and looking at it more closely?
The only other one that we currently know of would be whatever happens with Mount Avis and Northwest.
Right.
Because theirs is, I have it, and so, the highlights of it is that, and this was in the newspaper, it says, high bar set for school closure, elementary schools will not be closed without a yes vote by the electorate of the town or towns the school serves for the first 4 years. After 4 years, elementary schools will not be closed without a 2/3 majority vote of the electorate of the new district. So it takes it away from the town and moves it to the entire
That's what
district.
they want to change it to?
And
If
a
they
2/3
consolidate.
majority vote of the school board. That is what is on their ballot for November 8th.
For the
So-
proposed large district.
Got
Yeah,
Right.
So what, what outcome might be there, we'll have to wait and see.
And that was a compromise between the two potentially merging districts.
On the closure language, yes.
Yes, it was a very, very contentious, my daughter sits on that committee.
Yes.
That was a very hard, contentious, because you had to bring together both with the stresses that both districts have had, whether it's repurposing school or closing school. So,
Yeah, so it'll be interesting to see what happens and how they go forward.
Jamie?
One question. I get the sense that the committee interpreted its task, or it followed the task that was interpreted, that was given to it, to the letter, which is great. The spirit of this question, I think, is what process do we take to possibly close the school or maintain one? And I'm wondering if you think this article, researching this particular article, answers that general question, or sort of speaks to the spirit of the actual problem that we're dealing with? Or are we really doing research here on the different kinds of articles? And that's a little bit different than sort of answering the larger question.
So I'm just gonna speak for me, I'm not gonna speak for the committee, but I truly feel that when you find yourself in a position of possibly needing to close the school, you need to have a set of requirements, a procedure, a process in place of why are we closing it? Like, are they down to 10 students? Or, you're looking at the data and the data will tell you, what's the process? We don't have that. We've never looked at data and said, to close a school, it should have less than 20 students or whatever. I'm just making up numbers.
Sure.
You can't combine, you can no longer combine classes to make it effective. If you're combining, going back to thinking like the one-room schoolhouse, if we're gonna combine K through 6, and well, now it'll be K through 5, in one group, because that's all we have, is that really the best educational model for those students? So we don't have that anywhere yet, as far as I know. And so to me, before we could even really say, let's close the school, we would need to have that process in place so that we could then say, this is why we're looking at the data, how we're looking at it, and this is how we've come to our conclusion. That's me.
Steve, were you at it?
No, I was not.
Lindsay?
So this is the how. Did the why come up in the research? It sounds like there's an onerous step 2 that is lurking right around the corner of creating a similar chart of the why. We have the how, but
I'm sorry, I'm not following.
Yeah,
So
I think that they
this
said
is-
that there's only 2 districts who sort of list out reasons for or procedure or reasons why a school would be closed. Mary Heather, do you want to
I
add
think
to
the conversation too is, it's a little bit similar to when we're talking about policy and setting policy, right? Like there's policy where you can't have sort of granular specificity about implementation of that policy stated in the policy, right? And I think articles of agreement kind of fall in that same situation. I think it would be dangerous, and actually looking at, that orange example of Windsor Central, they have a very specific sort of if-then flow chart in their article that kind of binds them to only that. So what happens if, they have PCB contamination, then what? I think that an article should be clear enough where it defines who is making that decision and the process that needs to be followed before making that decision in terms of informing and involving the public, engaging the public so that it is a community-wide effort. But I don't know that an article is the best place to have the why and, the sort of flow chart decision-making for, under what circumstances, whether it's health and safety of students, whether it's staffing a building adequately, whether it's, the number of students a school is serving, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, there's all kinds of different factors that we're looking at. I'm not sure that article is the best place for that, but I do agree with Suzanne that these are things that are really important that we should be talking about as a community and certainly as a board, and it should absolutely be transparent.
yeah, I agree that, with the idea that the charter, the articles of agreement, that's not the place for it. I guess it's surprising to me that only 2, you're saying 2 districts. Are you talking about in the charter and the articles of agreement, or
Yes.
Yes.
only 2 districts at all? There's no procedure anywhere.
We did
We
not.
It didn't go there
Procedure.
yet,
We didn't
okay.
go down.
There was nothing, okay.
And I do think it's important to note, Windsor does have a procedure that's is better left in the procedure section. But Wyndham is very clear that it just asks for a report, a 1-year study. I don't think it delves, and I listened to a meeting where they explicitly said this is not procedure.
Yeah.
They were making it very clear it's an article.
Yeah.
So it just asks for a 1-year report on the study.
Okay, so does everybody feel comfortable that they understand the material in front of us? And they understand why and how each district is red, orange, or green, and they don't have any further questions for the committee? Okay, so what I'd like to do is get everybody's thoughts on, one, whether or not we should amend the Articles of Agreement, and two, if we were to amend, if you feel we should amend, what you would, where you would prefer decision-making to lie. So with the board and district, or with the board and town, or some other arrangement. Does anyone have thoughts on that to start us off?
We should go around to everybody.
I was gonna
right?
say,
Yeah,
do
yeah,
Wanna just-
everybody
Should we
individually.
just
Everybody,
start
but-
someplace and go around?
Yeah, I was just looking for a volunteer for a start.
I'll start.
Okay.
I am in favor of proceeding with looking into it, changing the charter, and I would lean toward the district-wide vote.
Steve, you want to go next?
I would prefer that we not change the charter. If we do change the charter, that we get rid of our, and go with state statute that says it's the majority decision of the board.
Mary?
I would go with the middle one, where it's the district and school board, and I think school board having the final. No, but with the criteria that we've just talked about, that there would be certain criteria that would bring us to saying, I'm sorry, even though financially it's just not gonna work for us to agree with. But I think it would be a multi-year process before I would.
Yeah, so you're saying sort of from the Articles Agreement standpoint, it would be the board and district, and then procedurally, you'd like to
Right.
see that spelled out.
Right.
Joanna?
I'm in favor of looking at changing the charter, and I support looking at effective town vote.
I agree that we should look at changing the charter and that we look at town vote.
Same.
You guys are moving too fast for me. I am in favor of changing the charter, Article 14, and having it be a board and district-wide vote.
Chip?
Struggle with this one because I know a lot of thought went into this process in the very beginning of the unification and the writing of the charter, as Suzanne knows, she was involved. I think I put it in the same realm as the budget to some degree, because if you elect to keep a school open in a certain, for whatever the reasons we're talking about, or you elect to close a school for whatever reason, that affects the entire district. And so, my thinking on it really goes to that I could see a change in the charter, I would support that, as long as maybe a supermajority of the board elects to present that to the public with then all of that procedural stuff to document why in fact that school should be closed and put it to the public. I've heard a lot of times that, the question that that's not democratic. I would say that's totally not true. Yes, it may be that the smaller town or the smaller school will be the one that has the least numbers. But in fact, that's democracy, isn't it? I think if it's going to affect the entire district. So that's where I come down on it. I just, we're a district of about 15,000 and something people. And just knowing, that a very, very, very small percentage of that total population. That isn't voting people, that's still, I couldn't find voters, but yet it's gotta be at least half that anyway.
We get about 8,000 ballots, I think.
Right, but in any case, that's where I come down at it, I would be looking at it. I just do not support that the individual town would have the ultimate decision on whether the school is closed or not. That certainly wasn't the original attempt, as I see it, for Act 46, even though school closure was not in there. It was to sort of try to separate out education from the individual schools in individual towns across Vermont. Some of those towns are very small, not just here, but across the state.
Thank you.
So are you saying district?
I'm saying majority of the board that would send it to a district-wide vote.
Okay, I was just trying to.
Middle
Yeah, no,
Put it all together, that's what you're saying, that's all.
I know I talked more than other folks did,
No,
but
it's all right.
that was my rationale
Mhm.
for thinking about it. And I would be open to changing it, but, and that does, I think, allow for the district to decide whether the valid data that's presented and whatever procedural stuff we come up with is valid to determine that.
Peter Conlon.
Thanks. So I've obviously thought a fair bit about this over the years. And it's like, so question one is, should we? And I do support that for two reasons, really. One, I think that for us to continue to move forward as a full community of learners, that it's important that this issue be settled and essentially to bring the temperature down and to have us all looking forward in a positive direction instead of continually having to wrestle with this. The other reason I support it is because over the 6 years we've been wrestling with it is it's a huge decision to put on the shoulders of only a volunteer group of community members to make. And I think sharing that decision-making with either the town or the district is going to help attract more people to serve on the board and people who are more interested in education than in this particular issue. As to whether it's a district or a town vote on the other side, I find myself struggling mightily. I think I tend to be a practical person and practically thinking to sort of talk about this with one town versus the entire district makes me think that really putting those energies into the town that's going to be most effective, as opposed to having to spread those energies out over the larger district, is probably the better way to go from a practical point of view. Philosophically, I certainly see where people come from thinking that we all share in the cost of this district and we should all be part of that decision making. So I guess I'll put myself down as leaning single town, but not feeling quite sure of where I solidly come down. Either if it does go to single town, I think it should just be a majority of both the board and the town, as opposed to super majorities.
Thank you. As for me, I'd say that I would fall down on the side of amending the articles for a lot of the reasons that Peter mentioned. I think that it's a huge weight on the shoulders of a volunteer board. And I do think that it dissuades people from wanting to join our ranks. And it's a huge decision. But I differ from Peter in that I think that as a board, we are fiduciarily responsible for the whole district. And we're spending the whole district's money, and so I think the whole district should have the opportunity to weigh in on the closure question.
When we made these articles 6 some odd years ago, we wrote the article around changing school in a manner that allowed boards to come to change if they needed to. We did not want to tie the hands of any board that was yet to come around how to close a school. Those conversations weren't easy. They were long. They were hard. I heard from people that will probably vote no for me when I run again because I'm going to say this. They told me not to change the charter, that they don't see any need to change it. They don't want us to change it. But at the same time, it is the board's responsibility to be financial managers of the district. And we represent the entire district. We don't represent any one town when we sit on this board. So it's hard for me to say this, but I would go along with changing it, but only if you went to a district-wide vote. I don't feel that since it's a district budget, is that we can say to one town, even though it's a district budget, only you can choose whether or not we're right in having to close your school based on whatever list of pieces we come up with. So I would be willing to consider a change, but only with a district vote. And I would keep in it that it has to be a majority of the board and probably a majority of the district. I mean, they vote on our budgets. So, and that's another way that townspeople can say if they like what we're doing or not. If they start voting down our budgets, we know that our budgets aren't going in the right direction. Something's wrong, and they're telling us through their votes at town meeting day. So, yeah.
Eddie, do you have any thoughts you want to share, or not to put your feet to the fire, but if you have any thoughts you can, or you can just say pass.
I don't think I'm quite as informed.
It's okay.
You didn't read all of that
That's
information.
okay. Just didn't want you to feel like we were leaving you out.
But what I will say though is one part that I do think I have an idea on is how the vote would go and how I feel about that. And I do feel that it should be left up to board in town. One, because I feel like this district in particular takes a certain amount of pride in what each town does. And I think specifically the way that your email sent out to the people in the community that started off with the Ripton Ridge Run and other events happening in these towns with these schools that have been subject to this closing things. I think it's important that each school that's looked at to be closed, the people in that town have a big say because they're the ones in that community affected by that school. I think the whole district, to an extent, can sometimes take away with that. So I would say the board in town decision is what I would be leaning to.
I would be in favor of amending the charter. I think it's a good idea. And I would look at the district board and the town involved to make that decision. And I think it may be a vague statement, but it needs to be decided on what is the best for the education of the students in that town. Period.
Thank you.
I get to go last.
You do.
Oh, this is great.
Bring it up there.
Am I supposed to take my mask off too?
Bring it home. No, I took it off just so much.
Whatever you're comfortable with, it's your choice.
I am in favor of looking at the charter to see if we can improve it to reflect the now. It's hard for me to, kudos to you all for being so laser focused on this, because it's really hard for me to just look at that one question, and that muddies my thinking, like that when I vote for the school board, if I live in Middlebury, I'm only voting for the people in Middlebury. I don't get to vote for who is representing Shoreham.
That's not true.
When I went on my ballot, I did not see the Shoreham and the Bridgeport.
That's not true.
They're all there.
They're
You're
all there.
voting not for Middlebury, you're
You're
voting.
voting for every representative in the ACSD.
That's why we don't say our names and what town.
Well, we don't say what town we're from, but.
No,
we're all
I
the
mean on
ballot.
election day.
No,
We're all
that's
on the
true.
ballot.
You were all, okay, I need to like check my memory. This is where my tired brain is like not functioning right. But for some reason, I'm remembering that incorrectly. So that is even muddier, that I'm too tired to function. But I fall more in general on the district side than just the town, because of how it impacts everybody in the district. But it's never, I don't know how to reconcile how, within the board, if it were the board and the district, there are so many Middlebury people who originally are from Middlebury, despite the mandate that we're thinking of all of the students. We're not representing the town that we live in, we're representing everyone, so I don't know, it's clear to me that yes, like revisiting the language that's on there, and I'm more, I don't know what Peter said, I sort of, it's a big responsibility for just the board. But it's still, it just seems like I live in Middlebury, so I try to wear the hat of somebody who lives in Ripton, and it's just very complicated, for if then the district is voting, there's so few people there. And I guess, if it came down to it, there could be, you can get the word out, but it's just, are there other ways for each individual town to have more say or more representation? Keeping in mind that we're all one, this whole unification thing is really tricky.
Thank you.
You have your answer, Chair.
So what I'm hearing is there's an overwhelming agreement about changing the charter. And it looks like the majority of the board is interested in looking at the authority, the decision-making authority to be both the board and a district vote, district decision. So I guess the question before us now is, do we feel that we're prepared to put a motion on the table that would sort of declare that intent, knowing without any of the details hashed out, but that is the intent of the direction of this board. And then we will come back and work as a board to talk about the requirements and sort of the nuances within, as well as it seems like there's an overwhelming interest to look at procedure associated to school closure.
I would like to be able to split that vote if you're talking about just one vote for both situations. Because I would vote to amend but I would not agree with you that, with the majority. So I want to have a voice, at least, when you put it forward for the district board and the district, I want to say
You want to be able
no.
to say no.
Yeah, okay.
I understand that. Yep.
Yeah, and it's complicated because I know a couple of other folks have already expressed this, are in support of doing it, but only if it's district plus board. I would vote against changing it if it were anything else. So we need to keep the questioning or the wording of the motion in mind.
Okay.
So maybe we do two motions.
So,
Well,
but
yeah,
you,
two
but,
motions, one,
Do we change the charter?
well, no, I think it needs to be, do we change the charter in the direction of board plus town? Do we change the charter
Oh, that's what you're
Okay, that's
saying.
what
board
Okay.
plus district?
Yeah.
I think
So
that's a
that
good way of doing
so that there's a clear outcome from either vote,
Yep.
what we're supposed to do as a board.
Okay.
Does that make
Yep.
sense?
Yep, I think that makes sense. Does that make sense to everybody else? Makes sense.
I did prepare a statement. I should have read it before I gave, when we went around, but I would like it to be part of the record at some point. I apologize for not
Okay.
reading it
Do
before I
you
gave
want
it.
to make your statement when the motion is on the table, or do you feel it needs to come before that?
It can happen after the motion, I think.
Why don't we do that? Okay, so let's start with, just want to see if Peter's doesn't, does someone want to offer some language around?
I'll offer a motion. I make a motion that the board, of course, now I'm having writer's block.
It's okay, we'll work with it here.
I'll make a motion that the board change Article 14 of the charter around school closure to include decision-making, or to provide for the decision about school closure to be a board and electorate of the ACSD district decision. I'll have to look at the recording to get all.
Can I get a second to that motion?
Second.
So that's one and two?
So that's, yep.
Okay.
So is there a
Question about that?
question or comment for the
Right,
motion on the
so-
table?
Like, as far as what that really means, like today we have supermajority board, just, maybe there's supermajority district, maybe there's not. That would be determined,
Right.
correct?
Right, correct.
The procedure.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
just want,
This is a motion
Right.
so that we can set in motion the direction
Right.
that we're
I
gonna.
just wanted to make
Yeah.
clarify
No, that's
that.
a good clarification, actually.
Okay, any other question or comment for the motion on the table?
I think Brian may have misinterpreted. This is the single and sole vote, not
No.
one of two, correct?
No,
No.
we're gonna do this motion, which includes, authority for closure with the board and the district, and then we're gonna have another motion that divides it, change the charter, and the authority goes to the board and the town in which the school resides.
That would only take place if this motion is unsuccessful.
It has to go that way. This has to fail, this motion has to fail for the
This
second
has to
motion to
fail
come
for
up.
the second one.
Because you could potentially have both of them pass, which you
Right.
can't have.
Yeah,
Right,
yeah.
okay.
Yeah, so you will move on to the other
Right,
one.
your
Start with the
your nay vote is your opinion being in public record.
Right, but it's including the fact that I would be a positive vote for the amendment to change, but not for the other
Right.
situation.
Right.
Yeah, I
Yep.
thought we were voting
Yep.
on whether or not to change, not what we were changing it to.
Okay, so do we need to make a motion? Peter, maybe you can help me out here. Do we need to make a motion for whether or not we are going to amend the articles, and then if that passes, make a motion in which direction?
I think that would be the cleanest and
that'd be
simplest way to do it.
Okay.
So I think the difficulty with that is that when we vote, if we support it, many of us have conditional support for that amendment.
Right.
And that is important.
Yeah.
So how do we address that?
Right, that
If
you
we-
wouldn't, some people may not choose to change the charter at all if it puts the authority for closure in the town hand. That's what you're saying.
Okay, then I would say that we move ahead with the motion that we have, and if people want to be clear that they support changing it, but would prefer the going to the town rather than the district, that they can put that in the record, but then would vote no.
Right, because
Yes.
you're.
So we can go, we'll go around and people can register their vote with comment. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay.
Lindsay?
This is a really big decision and it seems like we're like rushing it. We just, to have a vote where we're not only deciding whether or not we're going, I understand the conditional nature of some people's votes, but like, must we complete this action tonight? Or is it possible to take more time to consider it and to craft the language of the motion that we want to put on the table? Because it seems like there are a lot of people with conditional.
I'm not sure that condition is gonna change for some folks.
So for some people, they don't want to consider changing the charter if it would be the district, and others, they don't want to consider changing the charter if it's going to be the town. So never mind like majority, supermajority. I mean, so people aren't comfortable saying we agree we will change it, but we're not going to agree how we're going to change it. Like it feels wrong to decide tonight, like we're going to change it and we're going to change it in this way. It just seems too rushed. It's such a huge decision.
I agree, that's reasonable, and perhaps, folks need time to, maybe we should just go around and see if we need more
Right,
time.
why don't we do a hand vote if people feel that we should move on this motion tonight or postpone it till?
Which motion? To amend?
Brian, the motion on the table
Motion on
is
the
to
table.
amend the Article 14 to
Yes.
provide for this decision around school closure to be board and district.
Right,
That's the current
that's
motion
what-
on the table.
Right, but that's not what you were talking about as far as I can see.
It is what I'm talking about.
All right.
So, or any motion. Are people feeling that we are ready to vote on this tonight? Or do people want to hold off and do it at the next meeting?
Go around for a meeting.
Why don't we
Chip.
vote on amending it? I think one simple vote.
There's a motion on the
I
table
feel
right now.
we don't have the language yet. We are voting with the intention. of
Right, we are
changing.
setting the direction.
And we're setting the direction, and if that's the case, then I'm all for doing it now.
Mary Heather.
Same, I think folks, including myself, have a conditional feeling about it, and I'm not sure that's gonna change, so.
Jamie.
I really hear what Lindsay's saying, actually. Like, we're gonna set the direction, but we don't know the direction, we disagree on the direction, some people have two different directions in their head, like, I get the sense that we'll take a vote and it's not gonna mean much to a few people, it's gonna be confusing to the public. I feel pretty ambivalent, frankly, about the action that we're setting ourselves taking at 9:45. It feels a little rushed to me.
Barb.
So I believe that if there are a couple folks that aren't ready to vote, then we shouldn't vote. Because it's really close, right? But as we went around the room, it was very close. And so I think people need as much time, everyone, and if there's one person that doesn't feel that they have enough time to really think through and forcing them to vote tonight, I think is the wrong thing to do.
So I would say we should wait.
I might take this opportunity to read this statement. It's not completely random. It echoes what Peter Conlon was saying and a little bit with what Peter Lynch was saying. And I've been really careful not to talk about Ripton because I didn't want to, have this conflict of interest be questionable in people's minds. But it's really important to hear this side of it. So the reality of our current merged district is that towns can't leave, nor that can they protect their school from being closed. Ripton's withdrawal and subsequent return proves that. This reality was not on the ballot in 2016. In fact, I believe this signals that our accelerated merger agreement did not achieve the appropriate balance of power that our member communities desire and deserve. The Ripton experience has made it clear that the governance structure for small schools is broken or at the very least not a success. The state, instead of addressing it, continues to uphold that faulty system by passing the buck back to us as the local school board. And I do commend this board for forming the ad hoc committee, which in a way was an attempt to address the insufficient equity of Act 46. What I wonder about is this: what have we as a board learned from the past 3 years and Ripton's withdrawal? What can we appreciate about both the process and outcome of Ripton's return? The Ripton School Board played an important role in Ripton rejoining ACSD. That needs to be recognized. Moreover, the town of Ripton was able to progress through a very controversial vote and surface on the other side intact and just as committed. I believe this happened because of community trust. People in Ripton trusted the Ripton School District Board because the board accepted the burden of proof and worked tirelessly to find a solution that upheld the town's values. We can learn from that. I believe appropriate amendments to our charter would help our merged district work together and move forward with a greater sense of trust. We as a board need to accept the burden of proof by seeing school closure as a last resort, committing to exploring a wide range of alternatives, and increasing public participation in decision-making. Affected town vote, in my mind, is just one way to achieve the above. So I think if people aren't ready to vote, then we should.
Thank you.
I think we need to wait too, because there's a lot more to consider. I think the criteria and what we would be looking at before any decision needs to be so clear. So I would agree that we should wait.
So Mary, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
When you say criteria, are you saying that and this is just because I'm not sure what you're saying.
Yeah.
That before the board could hold a vote on possibly changing the articles, that we should put a policy and procedure in place for what we would look at to close the school, and then?
What
that
would
what
be
you're
the
saying?
factors that the board would be looking at where they felt like there was a need to close a school? So there's going to be multiple factors there, not just the size of the school, but
Right.
the building. There's a lot of other things that we need to think about. And so I think we need more time to think about what those factors would be.
Before an article change is what,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, so I'm on the hold off and think about it.
Steve, do you have an opinion?
I would like a chance to prepare a statement and read it into the record. I think that's probably the best way to go about this. Yes, I have responses, but it would be inappropriate to say them right now.
I personally feel comfortable voting tonight, but I respect if others aren't comfortable. I would hesitate to say that we need to agree that we need to wait until we have procedures for individual school closures in place before we come to any decision. I feel like that's what we try to do for the past 4 years with the facilities master plan. And we actually were never trying to say one school needs to meet these requirements. It wasn't really about that with educational outcomes or enrollment. It was more about the district and what's best for the district as a whole. And so I would really hesitate to pigeonhole us to say that we need to do that. Because in my opinion, that's not what school closure was about. It wasn't about an individually failing school. It was about utilizing our district resources for the benefit of all of our students in our district appropriately.
And I'm not thinking of a failing school. I'm just thinking of other factors.
That's all I have to say.
Lindsay, we know.
I've been seeing Peter's hand go on and off. I
Okay.
don't know if he has a procedural question. But,
I did just have a procedure. We had a motion, but I'm not sure we had a second before we started talking. So
We did have a second.
Yes.
So then,
Yes, we
had
had
a
2
second,
seconds,
and this is
actually.
the elongated version of the discussion as to whether or not we should continue the discussion or not.
All right, so just from a parliamentary point of view, what we would really need now is we have to complete the process of having a motion and a second.
Right.
Is to somebody to move to table the discussion until the next meeting.
Yep.
If we're gonna adhere strictly to Robert's rules.
Thank
I'll make
you.
that motion.
Thank you.
I'm grateful that people are willing to do that because like I haven't eaten since like noon. I'm really tired and this is way too important for like half of my brain to be functioning and like, you know, I don't know about you guys, but it's like almost 10 o'clock at night. I think we need to have like our best mind on this and maybe some of you are like, you know, raring to go, but like this is not my prime brain to consider
So
something like this.
Just procedurally, so we have a motion from
To
Brian
table.
to table it. Do we need a second for that
I'll
motion?
second it. We should take your put on it when we're tabling it too, because tabling it could be indefinite.
Indefinite.
Right. Well,
Your suggestion is to put a time and date for bringing it back next meeting?
what else?
I believe
Peter.
he said next meeting.
Okay.
Okay.
You make that motion.
Okay, so I too can appreciate the hour and people's hesitation. Even though, as I think Jen said, I personally would be ready to pass a motion tonight. So I think what we'll do is this motion has been tabled. We'll take it up next meeting.
Actually, Madam Chair, we have to vote to table.
Thank you. Nobody else in the room
Hey, just so
even
everybody knows,
thought
we-
that.
Interrupt you, you're on a roll.
Oh, you're being efficient.
I know, I thought I was being so efficient. Let's just vote on any bond. All right, so we have a motion from Brian. Thank you, Brian. To table the original motion. All those in favor.
Until?
Right.
Until the next meeting.
Yep.
All those in favor, please say aye.
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 All those opposed?
No.
Thank you. Any abstentions? All right, so we've tabled it until next meeting. And we will take up where we've left off tonight. We will hope to be able to pass a motion that indicates the direction in which the board wants to go. And I also would hope that we will be able to discuss the process for coming up with the language and the specifications around whichever choice whichever direction we go. Does that make sense to all?
Right, we can do that.
Okay. I see people packing their bags. We are not yet.
We're
Right,
not done.
but we think,
We were looking at the-
can we make a motion to postpone the next
Yes,
section too?
I think we should.
I think we can do that.
Stop these policies.
The policy.
And just a note that the next meeting is at Cornwall.
Okay, good luck Cornwall, we're coming.
I know. I hope they have more comfortable seats than.
Keep the lights on.
This-
Oh, come on now, I've sat
Those
on those
benches
tables for
with no
years.
backs.
All right, let's check it out.
Okay, so let's see.
Should we make them, if we can skip those, should we still do executive session? Does that need to
So-
happen
You can
tonight?
skip that.
We're gonna skip executive section.
Wow.
Is that gonna make Cornwall as long as tonight?
As well. The executive committee will come together and discuss the agenda. And we'll figure out how long it's gonna be. So with that being said, thank you, everyone. I really appreciate the thoughtfulness, even though it's late. I appreciate everybody's comments and the work that the ad hoc committee has done and the attention that you all have paid to it. I look forward to continued discussions at our next meeting. And with that, can I get a motion to adjourn, please?
Second.
Is that not a motion to adjourn?
It's not a
Are you asking
motion.
question or
Oh, that
something?
wasn't.
I don't know where the place, I was waiting for other, but I was the only virtual attendee with the report, and I couldn't hear, I could barely participate. And so I don't know if there's a way to improve it, but I could hear other people perfectly well, but I tried so hard and I could not hear what people were saying.
So Will has expressed these concerns about the technology when we go out
Yeah.
to other schools. And what I told him and was thinking in my head, it was that we would sort of do 3, and then we would sort of consider what the experience was like for both board members who are tuning in as well as public trying to tune in, and then discuss whether or not it's worth continuing doing them. And I think when we did them before, Zoom wasn't a thing.
Yeah.
And so we weren't reliant on technology. I think Zoom is here to stay and is a great alternative to be able to offer public as well as board members. And so I think we will have to have a discussion as to weighing the pros and cons of
Even
doing
if
it
I-
in small towns or not.
I really appreciated being able to do it, but it was the audio. It doesn't matter so much whether, I tried so hard to hear and I just couldn't.
Yeah.
And so if there's a way, Will has this magic with IT. I don't know if there's a way to use microphones or have a smaller room so the acoustics aren't bouncing, but I just wanted to say that to people.
Okay,
I don't know.
thank you. All right, so we have a motion on the table.
Yeah,
Great,
Jamie already seconded it. I'm
great,
sorry.
thank you. So we are adjourned at 9:54. Thank you all.
Yours is off to the school, just get